Hello. If you were looking for a scare tonight, you've come to the right place. I'll be narrating an hour's worth of creepy horror stories that I found off of Reddit. So without further ado,
These are their stories.
When I was 3 years old, I was in a really bad car accident. I didn't know it at the time, but that singular event would come to define everything about my life moving forward. What I remember about the accident is mostly a collage of backdated comments I was able to reel out of my father in the following years. He was driving me and my mom in his old 91 Chevy Tahoe through the twisting back roads of southern Illinois, weaving his way through the gnarled branches of oak trees which interlocked into a braided ceiling overhead. A fog had rolled in, giving the impression that we were driving through a cloudy tube. Everything was simultaneously bright and opaque. I didn't mind though, as I was in the back seat working on a coloring book. My mom was in the front talking with my dad or turning around to entertain my completed pictures. Although I was of the age where my memory was just beginning to mature, I still recall two things very clearly from the accident. First was the sensation of braking. I remember feeling the way a plate must feel to be dropped, weightless at first, then suddenly meeting a much larger, more solid object. The air popped like a firecracker and the entirety of my body shattered into hundreds of fractals. And then I remember a hand. It was my dad's hand pulling me from the wreck. I ended up hospitalized for weeks after the crash. My mom was less lucky. The impact had killed her instantly. As I've alluded to, I was young, and at the time I didn't fully understand the implications of what had happened. I knew something was missing, but it was like a word on the tip of my tongue, or the forgotten vanilla in a cherished cake recipe, coloring my experience but not the whole of it. Not like my dad. For him, it was the whole cake. He had somehow made it out with only a few scratches. I'm sure he had a really bad case of survivor's guilt, and frankly, looking back, I wouldn't have blamed him if he slumped into despair and spent his days drinking away his sorrow. But he wasn't that type of man. He got help. It took him years before he was able to recall anything that happened that morning, and most of it is still repressed, but he shared with me what he could, or at least that's what I had thought. My dad was a middle school teacher since before I was born, and he kept his job until very recently. As a result, we didn't have much by way of resources. I grew up on Disney Channel and TV dinners for the most part, but I didn't mind. When I became of school age, his job actually made caring for me pretty convenient. Since our elementary and middle schools were connected, he was able to drive me there and back each day. It was around 3rd or 4th grade that I realized I was different. I didn't understand the other children or even the adults most of the time. They would say things that immediately change their mind, or they would talk about something and in the next breath forget its existence entirely. I remember one day at lunch, I had just gotten my tray of hot food and sat down with some friends. One of the kids, Alex, was talking about a stuffed bird he had won for getting first place in Mr. Curtis's pop-up math competition. We were all admiring its blue wings and white belly and sharp black beak and beady eyes. I left mid-conversation to get a chocolate milk. When I came back, I asked to see the bird again, and Alex said, "What bird?" I was perplexed. "The bird, the blue jay you were just showing us." I remember all of the other kids looking at me like I was crazy. I figured they were all playing a trick on me, so I got up and went over to Alex's seat and crouched down, looking under the table. Then I sprung up and tried to open his lunchbox. "What are you doing?" he yelled. I felt so confused and embarrassed that I ran to the bathroom to cry. And then there was another time a group of kids were laughing about a joke one of the girls, Taylor, had made about our homeroom teacher's face looking like a seal. I knew it was mean, but at the time I just wanted to fit in, so I played along. But when I made a comment about her resemblance to the semi-aquatic animal, they all looked at me confused. "What are you talking about? We never said that." These misattributions kept happening, and it led to me being ostracized from most of the little childish cliques that popped up. I developed a quasi-standoffish temperament which I used as a shield against a chaotic world that I didn't understand. My dad eventually had me tested for ASD, autism spectrum disorder, but I passed the test. He asked if I wanted to move to a different town with different schoolmates, thinking that perhaps I was getting bullied, but I told him it was fine. Somewhere deep down, I felt like no matter where I went, this problem would follow me. You may think that I was simply coping with the absence of my mom, and while I'm sure that her absence has left certain holes in my life, kindly, no, that wasn't what was happening. You see, at first I didn't notice the instances of what I'll call blinking. I simply thought that I was misremembering things, objects, words, events. They were all little things anyway. A bird, a joke, my pencil box. It wasn't until 6th grade that I realized the magnitude of the phenomenon. I was in my dad's 6th grade social studies class, and we had just been assigned our Ancient Civilizations project, which involved creating a diorama of our chosen civilization and presenting its features to the class. My friend at the time, Claire, had taken my first choice of ancient Rome, which we had a heated argument about at lunch, so I was left with ancient Egypt. At the time, all I pictured for Egypt was a plate of sand. However, my dad and I went through some illustrated history books and pictures on the internet, and he really built up the project for me. Over the course of a couple months, he helped me shape 3 pyramids out of small wooden planks and a bunch of tanned clay. We placed them in the center of a giant square shoebox lid, which served as the container for the diorama. Then he bought some small wooden mannequin puppets, and we dressed them up in cloth clothes, mostly kilts and tunics, and colored their eyes, mouths, and hair. We added a few obelisks and some small box huts which were collected into a little village around the Nile. Finally, we added a light glaze of glue where we felt would be necessary, and then covered the whole project with golden glitter. As we worked on each part of the diorama, my dad helped me understand what we were adding and why it was important to ancient Egypt. I loved the way he talked about history. He spun everything into a miraculous story. To this day, I don't think I've ever had a teacher who came close to his level of charisma and creativity. As a result, I became really proud of my diorama. I memorized all the little details and rehearsed my speech in front of the mirror for hours leading up to the last couple weeks of class. And then, 2 days before I was supposed to give my presentation, everything fell apart. First, I need to apologize for deceiving you about an aspect of my story. I thought it might help you to understand what I was going through at the time. What I'm about to tell you is going to sound insane, I get that, but please hear me out. The truth is that I was never assigned to present on ancient Egypt. Everything else about Claire taking my first pick and Dad helping me with the whole project and my excitement leading up to the presentation was all true. But it wasn't a project on ancient Egypt. It was a project on ancient Citizen, which was a civilization located on the 8th continent called Catalan, the same name as the spoken language but unrelated, which was due west of Australia in the Indian Ocean. I know this sounds incredible, and if you want to believe it's all in my head, I get that, but I remember clearly all sorts of facts about it. The Malagasy, the same people who populated Madagascar, were the first peoples to discover Catalan and settle it. However, about 500 years later, Indian ships would arrive and create the civilization known as Citizen, a pidgin language formed between the indigenous population and new arriving Indians called Hiesa, pronounced Hi-Esu or Hi-Su. Catalan had a warm climate with plenty of natural resources, but Citizen had a dense enough population to require agricultural production. They grew rice, grain, sugarcane, vegetables, and even tobacco. I remembered all of these facts and more. My diorama reflected the main features of the Citizen civilization, and then 2 days before my presentation, I woke up and my diorama was entirely different. The hilly grasslands were traded out for sandy dunes. The Hindu statues and stone palaces became clay pyramids and large spear-like pillars, and everything was covered with the ickiest yellow glitter I had ever seen. Tears stung my eyes as I trampled over to my dad's room and banged on his door. "Dad, what did you do?" I yelled. "Honey," he responded, rushing over to the base of the stairs. "What's wrong?" "The diorama, it's ruined." "It's what?" he asked and ran up the stairs, leading me to my room. He looked over it for a few seconds, checking to see if everything was intact, then said, "I don't see it, honey. Where is it ruined?" I was completely dumbstruck. What did he mean he didn't see it? "All of it," I shouted. "The whole thing is wrong. Where's the grass and the stone buildings and the lady with the 4 arms and the elephants? Where's my project?" My dad looked at me in silence. "Lauren, baby, what civilization do you think you were working on?" "Ancient Citizen, of course. We've been working on this for months now. Dad, please tell me you remember." He knelt down and put his hands on my shoulders. "Honey, your project was on ancient Egypt. There is no ancient Citizen." You're lying," I protested. "Books, you have books. On your bookshelf." He took me into his study and showed me all of his books. None of them were on ancient Citizen. He even turned on his computer and typed in the name of the civilization, but all that came up was a near-matched Sidon. I remember feeling this sudden urge to puke. My entire body felt like it was pumping battery acid instead of blood. I started, but suddenly my head felt very light and I fainted. When I woke up, I was in the hospital. I had lost consciousness for over half an hour, enough time for my dad to call 911 and have the ambulance transport me to the nearest ER. They ran all sorts of tests on me, but they all came back fine. After a couple hours of IV fluids and monitoring, they released me with with my dad. I ended up skipping the rest of school that week. My dad didn't make me present my diorama. In fact, he never brought the subject up again. Part of me was glad. I just wanted to forget the whole thing ever happened. But another part of me couldn't move past what was clearly the most absurd thing to ever happen to me. About a week after the incident, I tried to broach the subject, but when I asked my dad about it, he didn't seem to remember our conversation at all. He said I had fallen ill and that's why I needed to go to the ER and miss class. I felt like I was going crazy. If I was older, I probably would have voluntarily checked myself into a psychiatric ward, but I was young and helpless and alone, and I decided that if I just ignored the changes well enough, I could still get along. This proved difficult though, as the blinking would only exacerbate in the coming months. Up until the time of the project, I hadn't been able to directly observe the phenomenon. It was always in retrospect that things disappeared. It was during the summer after 6th grade that this changed. I still remember the first time it happened. I had just gotten out of the shower and was drying my hair in front of the mirror. After it was dried, I threw on my clothes, then went to tie my hair up in a ponytail, but as I went to set the elastic tie, I felt its weight dissipate in my hand. I gasped and held my hand out. The circular black band was gone. Fast forward to 7th grade and the blinking had spiraled out of control. Reflecting back on it, most people would probably have assumed I was drinking psilocybin infused water, as the delusions were somewhat consistent with psychedelic phenomena, except these distortions were real, at least they felt that way to me. I'd wake up and grab the box of Special K but end up eating Cheerios. The McDonald's logo would look yellow and red one day, but purple and black the next. I'd be watching a show and then a different show and then a different one. It was as if the entire universe was a Christmas tree with millions of lights, and the lights kept shifting hues randomly, faster and faster, and I was the only one who could see their changing colors. I remember one night my dad made spaghetti for dinner and we went out onto the porch to eat it. While we were sitting, I saw our neighbor's house, a 2-story townhome, blink and become a single-story bungalow. I gasped and my dad asked what was wrong, but when I tried to explain, he just gave me a strange look. For him, no matter what changed, the world was always that way, while for me it didn't have a way. The situation peaked when Claire, that friend I mentioned before, disappeared. I texted her. My dad had bought me a BlackBerry at the beginning of summer break, but didn't get a response. When I asked her other friends if they knew where she was, I got the usual, "What are you talking about?" look. I knew right away what had happened, even though I didn't want to believe it. I went to the teacher and asked if there was a Claire in our class. She said no. I broke down in front of everyone. I couldn't take it anymore. I ran out of school. The lady at the front desk tried to stop me, but I just barreled past her. I kept running until I got to a big park across the street and bawled my eyes out until the police arrived and escorted me home. When they tried asking me what was wrong, I didn't say anything. There was literally nothing I could say that they would understand. That night, I prayed to God for the first time. My dad wasn't a religious man. He went to Catholic church with my mom when she was alive, but after she died, he never went back. Still, I knew how to pray, even if I never did it. I copied some of the people I saw praying in movies and interlocked my fingers and knelt down on my bed, stuffing my head into a pillow. "Dear God," I said, "please, please, please help me." I told him about my struggles and asked him to make them stop. I spent an hour saying the same things over and over again, and when I was finished, my little body was so tired I fell right to sleep. I knew something was different the second I opened my eyelids. I didn't only feel relieved, but I felt embraced. I felt like someone was watching over me. I felt like I wasn't alone. I moved through my day with cautious apprehension. I didn't want to get my hopes up only to be let down, but to my surprise, the blinking had stopped. At least I couldn't remember any of the inconsistencies, and to me that was a win. I began to pray regularly, and the more I did, the more I could feel the sense that someone was looking out for me. It was like I was getting a big hug from some cosmic force that loved me and wanted me to be happy. I made it a habit to pray regularly. I asked my dad if he could take me to a church, and he agreed to take me to St. Mark's, the same church that he and my mom used to attend. Over time, I realized that the actual church services weren't as important to me as the praying. For whatever reason, there was something about praying that was like a glue for my brain, holding the entire universe together. As I got older, I considered that maybe it wasn't that the changes were no longer happening, but that I simply didn't see them anymore. In other words, maybe I was just becoming like everyone else. Either way, I didn't mind. In my teenage years, I got into mindfulness meditation. I thought that I'd want to go into religious studies and become a theologian, so I started to learn about Eastern traditions in addition to Christianity. I joined a bunch of different school clubs to meet kids of different faiths. faiths: Judaism, Hinduism, Buddhism, Islam. I tried to find a common thread which linked them all and would explain what happened to me as a child. The metaphors of heaven and hell, good and evil, the Taoist yin and yang, duality. Every religion seemed to speak about a way of being that would lead to a better place. In some cases, that better place was a physical future existence, and in others it was merely being in contact with the perfection of nature or the present. Metaphorically, the teachings could explain what I had gone through in a kind of loose way, but there were no explicit statements about my condition. I want to fast forward to why I've decided to write about this now. To give you an idea of where I'm at, I'm now 25 and working on finishing my MA in computational linguistics. I know that's a bit of a switch from what I was thinking when I was a teenager, but I really only interested in religion because of the value praying afforded me as a child. I didn't actually have much interest in the subject itself. After my first year of college, I changed to an English major, which ultimately led to me taking a linguistics class and enjoying it so much that I switched tracks in my junior year. Considering the state of the world, I thought minoring in computer science might help me financially in the future, so I ended up charting a path which I figured might lead to something like developing translation software. Anyway, everything was going fine until a few weeks ago. I was out at an all-night diner with a few of my friends from the program. There was Jeremy, Martin, Bella, Jordan, and Macy. We had been working on a group project together involving modeling construction grammars by generating primitive 3D structures using C# and running the code through a game engine. It's a bit weird, but essentially we were trying to create a multi-dimensional model for language using a similar but more advanced concept than other LLMs, and just had a breakthrough. It was 2 a.m. though, and not a brain cell existed between the 6 of us. So instead we focused on a different problem: Macy's ongoing breakup with her semi-long distance trucker boyfriend. We tried to explain why Mike wasn't going to work out as we ordered a round of milkshakes and waited for the lone overnight kitchen worker to scoop out 3 balls of ice cream from the Dean's carton for each of us, blend it, then have the server deliver the vintage diner glasses on a plastic tray. I dug into my thick strawberry shake with a spoon. It was delicious. I kept eating but focused back on the conversation. I remember feeling something odd about one of the scoops, but I was so entrenched in Macy's story that I didn't notice the metal shard in my ice cream until I felt it against my lip. Pita, I spat out the shard and ice cream all in one motion, then covered my mouth, which I was sure was bleeding. The silver blade was probably as large as my thumb, and it had 2 jagged edges, as if it was fastened for the purpose of causing damage. "What?" I yelled. Everyone at the table turned to see what was the matter. "Hey Lauren, you okay?" I spoke through a covered mouth, using my free hand to point at the table. That was in my, but it was gone. "In your shake? Was something in your shake?" asked Jeremy. I froze. In that moment, the stories of my childhood that I had only remembered as faint nightmares came back in a wave of crushing terror. How could I have been so stupid to think they would simply vanish forever? No, this isn't the same thing, I thought, but deep down I knew it was. I drew my hand away from my lips and saw that it was dry, no blood. When I looked back up, all of the blood in my veins went cold. My friends were smiling at me. Their lips were elastic like taffy, stretching to reveal their teeth. I could feel them radiating malevolence, as if the only thing holding them back from picking up their utensils and stabbing me to death was some thinly veiled force field. The moment lasted for what felt like half a minute, then Jordan said 2 words which made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. "Found you." The words ricocheted in my now adrenaline-powered skull, but just as he spoke them, the world blinked and my friends were back. Bella reached out and grabbed my hand. I pulled away, but when I saw her concerned expression, I relented. "Sorry guys, I think I'm going to have to call it," I said. "You sure, Elle?" asked Jordan. "You look like you just saw a ghost." "Yeah, thanks, but I stumbled for a lie, but when one wouldn't come, Martin stood up and said he'd walk me out to my car." "Thanks," I said as I got into my little 2015 Jetta. "It's just been a long day." "No problem, Lauren. You know, if there's ever anything—" "I know," I said, but didn't mean. Some things just couldn't be shared. I drove for about 5 minutes before stopping at a gas station. I pulled in and parked near the back. Then I interlocked my fingers and prayed for half an hour. I apologized for not taking my praying seriously and asked to once again be granted peace. Unlike my younger years, I also drifted into other avenues of thought. I imagined my mom. I pictured the whole arc of my life, all of the little decisions that led me to where I was. I cried for a long time. I felt like that little little girl again reaching out for help. I still felt so lost, so out of control. There were so many things missing and I was so confused. I decided then to take a trip back home and visit my dad, who was now working as a private tutor. He made enough prepping affluent students for the ACT and SAT that he could spend his free time pursuing his real passions, reading and writing. When I arrived at his doorstep that weekend, he greeted me with open arms. "How are you, kiddo? It's been, what, a year or so?" It was actually more like 2 years, but I didn't tell him. I just smiled and nodded. "Well, come in." The house was almost exactly how I remembered it. Linoleum floors, beige walls, a few scattered pictures, the scent of chamomile, everything minimalist. There was a quaintness, a prettiness to the way everything seemed to be well kept and in a perfect place. From the cherrywood chairs we'd sit in to eat to the cream-colored love seat, I felt at home. I spent the drive thinking of what I would talk to my dad about, but ultimately I wasn't sure what I'd say. I loved my dad, but I think growing up it was easy to see him as naive. After all, arguably the most important episodes of my childhood were completely unknown to him. In that way, I kind of loved him from a distance. Maybe losing my mom also played into that. Maybe I just had trust issues. And after what happened at the diner, luckily there hadn't been any blink since. I stayed for a couple days and he showed me around some of the different coffee shops where he'd tutor kids or write some of his stories. I met some of his friends, mostly other retired or part-time teachers who were in a similar place in life. I was happy for him. Then, on Sunday, he made me my favorite meal growing up, homemade carbonara pasta with chicken and broccoli. The sauce had a few different cheeses, butter, olive oil, and a raw egg yolk. It was the perfect blend of creamy, savory, and sweet. After we ate, he cracked open a scrapbook of some old photos and other clippings he had put together. We reminisced about the past and laughed whenever I'd cover up one of my awkward pictures. He brought up some stories from school that I had forgotten, naming some teachers that I hadn't thought about in years. Apparently I had started at the end because as I moved to the other end of the book, I kept getting younger and younger. I flipped to the last pages and noticed a couple pictures of my mom that made my heart sink. "She was beautiful, wasn't she?" said my dad. I agreed. I flipped to the last page and saw a collage of newspaper clippings. One of them was related to the accident. It was headlined, "Two Survive Head-On Collision." After a cursory glance at the text, I noticed something odd. It said, "Both the husband and child, a 3-year-old girl, sustained life-threatening wounds. The husband was found unconscious on the scene. The girl was found 20 meters away from the vehicle, crying." I swallowed, trying to remember back to what happened that day. The feeling of crashing, of the world slowing down, then breaking, returned. And then there was a hand, my dad's hand, or was it? If he was unconscious, who pulled me out of that wreck? I looked up at my dad. He was smiling. I shot up and started backing up slowly toward the door. "No, not you two. What is this? What's happening? Who are you?" My dad, or whatever was controlling him, laughed. "Oh, Lauren, you know who we are." He purred as he stood up. He lifted his hands and the lights began to flicker, then bend in a way which shouldn't have been possible. Dark figures began to propagate from the shadows along the walls. The pictures nailed there began to blink out of existence. I turned to run toward the door, but the handle was gone. Glass shards materialized all around me and swarmed like locusts. Certain I was going to die, I dropped down on my knees and once again turned to prayer. This time asking God to directly intervene and save me. Everything went quiet. "Honey, are you okay?" I didn't trust his voice. I knew if I opened my eyes, I'd see that awful smile. He was just toying with me. "It's not you," I said in between muttered prayers. "I know it's not you." "Honey," my dad said closer. I felt his arms wrap around me. This was it. I was going to be suffocated. I waited for the inevitable crushing weight of my chest collapsing. I waited to break all over again. "I would never hurt you, Lauren. I love you more than anything in the whole world." I burst out in tears. "No, it's not you. I know it's not you. You don't exist." My dad's weight dissipated. I opened my eyes and saw that he was no longer there. "Dad," I called aloud. "Dad, where did you go?" I checked all over the house, but there was no trace of him. There were still pictures of him all over the house, so I knew he hadn't blinked out of existence like everything else, but somehow he was missing. I left the house and got a room at a hotel where I am now. I'm sure at this point that whatever is happening to me is no longer random. Something out there is actively trying to hunt me. Maybe it has been my whole life, but only now it can see me, however weird that sounds. If that's right, then God has been on my side trying to protect me from this demon or monster or devil or whatever it is. Regardless, the methods I was using when I was younger are not going to cut it anymore. I already posted my story in several other small circles and have gotten gotten one reply. A man who goes by the name Trent, apparently it's an alias. He said that he has some insight into my condition and can offer help if I want it. I'm planning on meeting with him tomorrow. I'm not sure if it's a good idea, but at this point I need answers. I can keep you updated with my progress if that interests you, and to anyone who knows anything about what's happening to me, please, I could really use your help. Back during the peak of the blinking crisis, I remember having a lot of difficulty sleeping. It was common for me to average only 4 or 5 hours a night, and the little sleep I did get was marred by terrible nightmares. One in particular recurred many times. I was only 8, but somehow I was in the driver's seat of our family's old SUV. My arms were long enough to steady the wheel, but my legs didn't quite meet the pedals. It didn't matter though, since the car seemed content to continue on at a constant pace. I looked over and saw my mom in the passenger seat. Her face was a blurry likeness pieced together from the dozen or so pictures I'd seen of her over the years. I tried to bring her into focus, not only because I missed her dearly, but because she was speaking, pleading even. She waved frantically at me, then brought her leg up and slammed it down on the floor mat several times. I didn't understand what had her so upset until she pointed out the front windshield, and I saw we were hurtling directly toward a giant tree that had fallen in the middle of the road. Panicking, I stomped for the brake, but my seatbelt protested and pulled me back like an invigorated dog on a short leash. I sat up and tried clicking it off, but it wouldn't budge. My breaths became hollow cries, and I felt my heart beat against the bars of its bony prison. I grabbed the steering wheel and pulled it to the left, then right, attempting to swerve off the road, but it was as if whatever kind of glue was locking up the seatbelt was also fixing the steering wheel in place. "Mom, what do I do?" I yelled, tears streaming from my eyes. She was yelling back at me, but it was as if there was a divider between us, and neither of us could hear each other. I turned back just in time to see the giant oak tree meet the front bumper, and then I jolted awake with a piercing pain in my chest that radiated up through my throat in the form of a giant scream. My little legs kicked under the covers and tears rained down on my pillow until my dad ran in and knelt at my bed. "Lauren, are you okay? Did you have a bad dream?" I grabbed my pillow and hugged it so my face was covered, then effused a in a long wheeze while rocking to either side. "Oh honey," he soothed and brushed my hair, then the tears from my face when I would allow it. Time would pass in silence, and when I began to get the sense that my dad was ready to leave, I'd chirp out, "Stay," in that way children do when they're embarrassed about wanting something. "Always," my dad would reply. Then he'd post up on the floor with my large tomato plushie as a pillow. One night in particular, it was deep in the night, and I had woken to a tapping sound outside my window. I was so afraid that a monster had snuck into my room while I wasn't looking that I made him lay next to me and face outward. I'd peek my eyes open every minute or so to check and make sure my dad was there, staking out the room. Eventually he rolled in close and said something that I still remember to this day. "Hey baby, guess what?" he whispered. I mumbled. "I think you scared the monster away." I tried to picture this through the fog of my fatigue. Something seemed off about the statement, like it wasn't logically possible, but before I could piece together the words to express that, my dad cut back in. "It was scared because it realized you're a superhero, and you know what your greatest superpower is?" I shook my head, making sure to rub my forehead against his shoulders so he could sense it in the dark room. "Your greatest power is that you get to tell the monsters what to do, because the monsters are only as strong as the stories you tell about them, and there's all kinds of stories, happy ones, sad ones, scary ones. Tell me, this monster you think snuck in, would you say he's part of a scary story?" "I don't know," I said, confused. "Maybe." He hummed, contemplating. "Well, I want you to remember this. You have the ability to tell any kind of story you want. Maybe there are monsters, but that means there's heroes and angels too, right?" I was beginning to doze off to the comforting sound of my dad's deep voice, but I gave another affirmative "So if you're ever scared, honey, just dream up a better story. A story that will bring you peace. Do you understand?" But I was already out. I woke up the next morning to the feeling that someone was in the hotel room with me. The drapes were drawn and the only sound was the AC unit blowing cold air. But when I looked toward the dark corner of the empty coat rack, my mind conjured the face of my dad, smiling at me, chanting that same awful line. "Oh, Lauren, you know who we are." I was no longer a child, but it took a couple minutes of cold focus before I muscled the courage to ascend from the safety of my covers and flick on the lamplight. The small amber radius extended to where my dad's feet would have been if he was standing there, but there was was no one. I let out a sigh and collapsed back onto the mattress, thinking back on all those years growing up. The same man who had helped me conquer my fear of the dark was now the monster hiding in its shadow. I looked over my shoulder and saw the clock read 10:15. My meeting with Trent was in 3 hours. I moaned and stretched my arms back until they knocked against the headboard. Then I collapsed back onto the mattress, meditating, gathering energy like a compressed spring. All at once, I jumped up and glided over to the drapes, opening them in a single fluid motion. I grimaced at the sunlight, but the warmth felt good against my face. I stopped by the nightstand and gulped down the final few swigs of a bottle of mellow yellow that I had purchased from a vending machine the previous night, then undressed and hopped in the shower. The warm water wasn't enough to wash away the previous night's memories. When I closed my eyes to lather my hair, I was back in my living room, standing opposite the demon that had taken on my dad's form. His smile, his laugh. It was like someone in my head was flipping a switch between the man I loved growing up and a terrible monster. But the fear was more powerful. I heard something drop onto the tile floor on the other side of the curtain. The noise made me gasp, and I opened my eyes while shampoo was still streaming down my face. I swiped the shampoo out of my now burning eyes and squinted at the curtain, trying to see through it, but I couldn't make anything out. Is anyone, I started, trembling, afraid to finish the sentence. I reached out and pinched the end of the curtain. My heart was in overdrive. I swallowed, then pulled it toward me and peeked out. I scanned the room, but I couldn't see anything out of place. It wasn't until after I finished showering and wound myself up in one of the hotel's 2 small towels that I saw what had made the noise. I bent down and picked up the stub of a razor blade that had fallen onto the tile right next to the puffy gray shower rug. It wasn't mine, and I was pretty sure hotels didn't keep unguarded razor blades just laying around. When I held it up, it occurred to me that if it had simply fallen a few inches to the left, it would have been buried in the rug, and perhaps I would have stepped on it. I stared at myself in its steely reflection, cold, lonely, small. What if I was all I was able to think before the blade blinked out of my hand? I threw on some clothes, packed up the few belongings I had into my purse, then checked out of my room. I didn't feel safe going back home after what happened, but I also didn't want to go anywhere else. I got in my car and drove aimlessly up and down the town streets, focusing only on the car ahead of me. Anytime I started to travel down an avenue of thought, I'd make a turn or speed up or hit the brakes, anything to keep my mind distracted. It was sweltering outside, but I'd turn the heat on for minutes at a time until I felt drenched, then toggle max AC until I was cool, then back to heat. I repeated the basic driving tenet 10 and 2, 10 and 2, 10 and 2 inches like a mantra, a chant to focus my attention on a single point, and then I pictured that point disappearing. I began to think that maybe I wanted to disappear. I fully intended to keep going that way until 1 o'clock, but after about 30 minutes my meandering route had led me to St. Mark's Catholic Church, where a large group of people were gathered around a long line of tables in front of the building. I slowed down. At the front of the venue was a large white cardboard sign which read, "Plant a seed, share the joy." I wasn't sure what that meant, but my boredom had come to a head, and I rationalized that if there's any place on God's green earth that would be safe, it was this one. I parked along the closest side street, then walked over to the church. Rows of white tables were covered with cardboard boxes filled with small plants that were wrapped up in individual paper pots. I watched from a distance as people behind the tables carefully removed the plants, one by one, and offered them to passers-by. I continued down the line, a sheep in the herd, and allowed myself to sink into childhood memories. I had somehow made it out the other end near the narthex when I heard a woman's voice call to me. "Hey dearie, have you gotten one yet?" I turned and saw a small, gray-haired lady with rose-colored glasses. "Oh no," I started, attempting to decline, then paused. The old lady grabbed one of the plants and held it out for me. "Here," she said, "come on, I won't bite." "As far as you know," I thought, and stumbled forward with a sigh. "Thanks," I said, and took the plant. "What is this all for anyway?" "It's a giveaway," the old woman responded. "Staff have been growing these plants, tomatoes and garlic mainly, so they could offer them to members of the parish. The idea is to have the members grow the produce, then donate it to St. Mark's food pantry to give to those in need." "Oh, that's actually pretty cool," I replied and inspected my plant, which was at present nothing more than a small green stem. "So which kind is this one?" "That one is..." The old lady stopped and inspected the other plants near where she had grabbed mine. "Tomato." Tomato," I repeated. "Well, thanks again." "Of course, dear," the old lady beamed. "We're all responsible for each other." I nodded, then continued back through the crowd toward my car when, through the large vestibule windows, I saw a priest speaking to a young couple. It had been a little over a decade since I had attended a service. I stopped going during high school when I started studying other religions, and I didn't recognize this priest. He was short, just over 5 feet tall, bald, and African American. He wore the customary black robe and white collar, and there was something in his smile and the way he seemed to be affirming the couple that made me yearn to speak with him. I considered for a moment, a bit embarrassed to be stepping back into church after all this time, but the thought of being able to burn 10 minutes talking with someone who might have some insight into my situation was too tempting to pass up. I waited near a portrait of Mary Magdalene, my tomato plant in hand, staring off at the pristine series of stained glass images portraying the death and resurrection of Jesus. About a minute in, the priest met my eyes. He smiled, his way of telling me he knew I was waiting, then finished up with the couple and made his way over. He had a bit of an accent when he spoke. It was Ugandan from best I could tell, and a proclivity for laughing at the end of his sentences. "Hello, miss, I don't believe I've had the privilege," he said and held out his hand. He leaned in as he spoke and his smile tugged on the corners of his eyes, which were already marked with use. I shook his hand and returned what I'm sure was a weak smile. "No, I don't think so. My name's Lauren. I used to come here when I was little. It's been a while." "Well, I see you picked a good day to visit, if you're into gardening, that is," he remarked with a laugh and gestured toward the plant. "It's nice to meet you, Lauren. My name's Martin. Father Martin if you prefer." "Father Martin," I repeated. "I have a friend named Martin. It's a good name." He laughed and said, "Thank you. I'll pass that one along to my mother. She loves the praise." I laughed back. He carried himself in such a carefree way that I was put immediately at ease, almost to the point where I forgot what I wanted to talk to him about. I started, attempting to word my question in a way that didn't sound like I needed psychiatric help. "I have a couple of religious questions for you, if you have time." "That's what I'm for. Ask away." "They're about miracles, like the ones in the Bible. I was wondering, do you think that miracles still happen today?" "Miracles, huh?" he started. "You mean like water into wine?" "Kind of, yeah." He contemplated. "Well, I haven't seen them myself. You know, I may be a priest, but I also have a degree in physics. I think God made the world according to laws, right? But I do think God has the power to intervene. Yes. I just have never seen it like, you know, the biblical type of miracles. To me, there are miracles happening all around us, miracles we can't see." "Exactly," I responded, thinking about how no one else could see the blinks. "Those kinds of miracles, what are those miracles we can't see?" One of Father Martin's eyebrows raised and he rubbed his chin. "Well, I think the greatest miracle is the miracle of God's love, which was perfected in Christ and offered to each of us. It's his power to heal even the most troubled mind. By coming into alignment with God's will for us, we can see the true purpose of this existence." No, he's not getting it, I thought. I scrambled to my other entry point. What about the story of Job? God made a bet with the devil that Job would stay faithful to him no matter what the devil did to him. Do you think that kind of situation is possible? Father Martin's expression drooped into a concerned frown. There's quite the difference between miracles and the story of Job. I suppose I see what you're getting at, though. Job's suffering is in some ways the antithesis to positive miracles. In this life we are tested, sometimes to the point of losing everything, but even that person who has more reason to hate God than anyone else can once again find peace and eternal happiness through faith. In fact, it's often the person who is lowest in the pit of suffering that needs the light of Christ more than anyone else. I thought back on the first night that I prayed. It was in my moment of greatest helplessness that I reached out to God, and I thought I had found my answer in Him. But now, after what happened last night, after all these years of chaos, not merely losing things that were important to me, but my very sanity, I needed more than just blind faith. I couldn't just sit idly by and hope things would get better. I smiled at the priest and said, "Thank you, Father, this has been very insightful." "Of course, sister, I'm sorry if I couldn't have been of more help." "No, I think I understand now. now. I've been wrestling with something, and I think God wants me to confront it. I think I've been running away and hiding from it for so long that I'd convinced myself it disappeared. Father Martin nodded in understanding. Well, in that case, will you let me leave you with a prayer? I was a bit taken off guard by the request, but I accepted. Sure, Father. I watched as he made the sign of the cross. Then he lifted his hands and closed his eyes. Dear God, I am so happy to have had the privilege of meeting with Lauren today, especially on a day such as this where we are offering gifts for those who need them. You have heard her desire to confront the things that are troubling her. I ask that you bless her with strength and peace and a clear conscience that she may overcome these challenges. God, bless us with your spirit that we may see your hand in our lives. Amen. Amen, I said. As I was leaving, Father Martin called out to me and said, "Oh, just so you know, this Friday at 7 we are having a barbecue at the parish center. I would love to see you there if you're able and wanting." Turning back, I smiled and said, "Oh, okay, thanks, Father. I'll think about it." The priest nodded, and with a smile, he sent me off. I walked into the deli at 1 o'clock on the dot. The customers who had arrived for the lunch rush were already cleaning up their trash and heading out. I dodged past a few of them on my way down the long, narrow path leading to the front counter, while I waited behind a couple of elderly folk who were picking which soup they wanted to pair with their ultimate grilled cheese. I looked around for Trent. He hadn't sent me a picture or any way of contacting him throughout the day, so I wasn't sure what I was looking for, but I figured I'd see some man half hidden behind a newspaper scouting me out. Maybe I watched too many movies, I thought. Ma'am, you're up," croaked the teenager behind the register. "Oh, right, sorry," I replied and stepped up to the counter. I muttered, scanning the menu for something that looked edible. Could I just get... I made sure to mouth every syllable as they were words of their own. "We have a deal, the try-two combo, sandwich and a soup for $9.99. The cashier repeated for what was probably the 50th time that day. "Yes, that sounds good. I'll do the Italian sandwich and potato soup. And a drink, please." After I paid for the food, I wandered around the tables, hoping to find someone who looked like a Trent. I was picturing a short guy, runner's build, with long brown hair, tucked somewhere neatly away in the corner. So I was not prepared when the Hulk stunt double growled my name from a table smack dab in the middle of the restaurant. He had a pale, square face that was spotted with freckles and a sinking property that comes with the lethal combination of stress and age. His hair was relatively short. Probably it was brown or auburn, but since it was slicked back, it looked almost black, and he wore what looked like janitor coveralls. There was even a cloth tag pinned to his chest which read, "Trent." "Lauren," he repeated. "Yes, that's me," I said, and took a seat across from him. I saw a brown tray on the table in front of him, and on the tray was a large white soup bowl. It was empty and beginning to crust along the edges. He must have been here for some time already. "I didn't know where you'd be, so I was worried we might miss each other. I'm glad you found me, though," I said while looking over Trent more thoroughly. His large hands were stretched out in front of him on the table. He wasn't wearing a ring, so he probably wasn't married, and his face, it was stern. He seemed like a no-nonsense kind of guy. Then I saw his eyes. They were sapphire blue, probably the most stunning I'd ever seen. "We only spoke on the internet, so I hope you don't mind, but I usually run a preliminary test on anyone I meet who claims to have abilities such as yours," Trent said while reaching into his pocket and removing a device that had the size and shape of an electric razor. "All you have to do is look into it. It takes maybe 5 seconds, 10 at most." "Oh, sure," I said reluctantly. I asked while reaching for the device. Trent clicked a button and released the cylindrical head which opened, revealing a glass circle about the size of an iris. "I'll hold it, just look into the center. A red cross should appear, then it'll take the picture." Okay, I replied and did as he instructed, leaning my head forward to look into the device. Sure enough, a red cross appeared. Was all I got out before the light turned blue and I saw a gray fog disperse and billow throughout the inside of the tube, extending for what I perceived to be miles. My jaw went slack and I couldn't breathe for maybe 5 seconds. Then Trent re-shuttered the device and turned it over. 72, he said with a hint of shock. "That's the highest I've scanned to date." He looked back at me, more relaxed now, and muttered to himself, "How have you been able to function for this long? At this level, you should basically be half in, half out." I rubbed my forehead, feeling a mixture of pain and frustration and fatigue and impatience which all poured out at once. "Listen, Trent," I said as sternly as I could. "I came here because you said you knew what was wrong with me and that you could help me. I get you have to make sure I am who I said I am, but now it's your turn to pay up. How do I know you know anything about my condition? You said my mom might still be alive. What does that even mean? I saw her die right in front of me. I want answers." I waited for Trent to respond, but he only lifted his head. I turned around and saw a girl holding a tray of food. Hi, sorry to interrupt. I have an order 36 for Lauren. Oh yes, thank you, I said. The worker placed the tray down on the table in front of me, and when I saw the food, I suddenly realized how hungry I was. Trent must have also realized this because he folded his arms and said, "Go ahead and eat, I'll explain while you do." I wanted to protest, but my salivating mouth made other plans. Fine, I said. I grabbed the metal spoon off the tray and started on the soup, bracing against the steaming heat of the potato chunks. As I ate, Trent moved all of the items on his tray off to the side. Then he flipped the tray over so it was raised slightly off the table. He took his cup and placed it face down in the center. Then he rolled up a few of his used, blue mayonnaise packets and charted a track across the tray. "What are you doing?" I croaked out between bites. Trent ignored me and continued by ripping up a napkin into strips and placing them alongside the mayonnaise packets. Finally, he snapped 10 toothpicks in half and stuck them in the tomb of a dozen overlaid napkins. "It's your diorama," he said at last. "It's my what?" "From the story you sent me, your diorama. When I read about it, it gave me a good idea of how to explain the blinking." I pointed at the cup in the center. "Is that supposed to be a pyramid? Because I'm pretty sure you're in the wrong geometric neighborhood with that one." "It's an analogy," he said. "Of an analogy," I quipped back. "Look," he picked out one of the toothpicks and held it out in front of me. "This could be a person, an animal, a crowbar, whatever you want. The point is, this diorama is a stand-in for our universe. This is everything that exists that we can see, okay? Okay. Now me." Trent placed a hand over his heart. "I'm not in the diorama. I don't exist in the universe." "In the universe where a cup is a pyramid, or the actual universe," I said, unable to control myself. Trent grimaced. "Sorry, keep going, I get it." Things pop into. Trent threw the toothpick back onto the tray, or out of. He picked the toothpick back up. "Our universe at will based on forces," he patted his chest again, "that exist in other realms," he gestured to the room, "that are connected to our universe." He tapped 2 fingers against the tray. These things could be objects like, say, a toothpick, or entities like the one you encountered yesterday. The blinking experience that you described aligns with the typical experience of a moderate antenna. That's what I call people like us, antennas, because we can pick up on signals others can't. You mean you see the blinking too? Yes, but not to the same extent as you. If all the blinks are gathered in a giant picture that you can see, I'm traversing the image through binoculars, maybe even a microscope depending on where we are. I thought about this. I guess it was possible there were other people like me out there, but since I had never met anyone, I didn't really consider the idea until now. And then for him to say my ability was somehow much stronger than his. "But," I started, "I haven't even seen that many blinks since I was a child. It's just more focused and malicious now." Yeah, Trent scratched his head. "That's the thing that got me really interested in you. Somehow you seem to be able to control it without gear, just by praying. And look, that's all well and good, but I don't want to give you the false impression that I'm some kind of religious leader. I like to look for logical, scientific explanations for things. So that's the frame I'm coming at this from." I took a sip from my drink. "That's fine," I said. "The truth is that's why I reached out to you in the first place. I wanted an explanation I could understand. An explanation that was directly related to what I'm going through. Then we should get along just fine." I was scooping out the last potato that was stubbornly gliding along the bottom of the bowl when, out of the corner of my eye, I caught a glimpse of the old man from the line shooting up from his bench and standing in army erect form. I felt a tingling sensation tickle the back of my neck. I didn't want to turn toward him. I knew what I'd see if I did. "Trent," I whispered, trying to tip him off. "Huh?" He grunted. Then when he saw my expression, he snuck his right hand under the table and said, "Do you see it? Is it here?" I cocked my head to the left, signaling toward the old man that was now facing us, but Trent didn't seem to notice him. His eyes just kept scanning the entire front of the restaurant. Then I saw the old man take a step in our direction. "Lauren, oh Lauren, I've been looking for you, Lauren," the old man said in a low gravelly voice that gave the impression he was gurgling liquid tar. I turned and saw his face. It was cold and expressionless, and a butter knife was poking out of his left fist. When I met his eyes, he smiled that horrible smile. "You're slippery, you know that?" he spat. "Why can't you just stay put? Don't you get tired of running from your old friend, or have you forgotten about me?" "Trent," I mumbled out, "right there. And this guy, you think he can help you? He's only here to help himself. If that's not clear, you really are a lost little lamb." "Oh, quick, give me your hand," Trent instructed. I was silent, my eyes still pinned to the old man. Skit, skit, sk. The demon-possessed senior wagged his finger at me, taking a step, then another step, shortening the distance as much as he could while I was entranced. Then, suddenly, he sprinted forward at a speed that shouldn't have been possible for a man his age. "Trent," I screamed. "Lauren, give me your hand." I spun around and grabbed Trent's outstretched arm just as the old man lifted the butter knife over his head like a pickaxe. Then I saw Trent pull out what looked like a toy gun from under the table and point it at the demon. "Gotcha," Trent remarked. I braced for a gunshot, but there was no noise. After a couple seconds, I looked back and saw the old man sitting in the booth opposite his wife, his hand tremoring as he reached for his large drink. "What did you?" I asked, but Trent was already pulling me out of my seat. "Come on, we have to go," he said. "The effect is temporary, he'll be..." Before he could get out the last word, I saw the cup pyramid on Trent's tray blink out of existence. The sound of a plate shattering rang out from a table up ahead. The lone woman standing there slowly turned around, smiling, with a fork in one hand and a piece of the broken plate in the other. Trent shot her with a toy gun as we ran past and then barreled through the front door. "Where are we going?" I asked between gasps. "My van, it's loaded with kit." "And then where?" "Your house," replied Trent, who stashed his gun back in his pocket and took out a key fob. "My house? But that's where it appeared." "Yeah, and that's where you banished it." Trent waved me into the passenger seat of his Ram 3500 ProMaster. I noticed right away the dash, which looked more like it belonged in a new limited edition EV than a cargo van. The ignition kicked on automatically, and I heard the beep of a sonar ping precede an English woman's voice calling out like some Oxton GPS saying, "Scanning for anomalies." Trent shifted the van into gear, and I heard the wheels sputter as we accelerated backward and whipped out of the small parking lot. "What's your address?" Trent asked. I gave it to him, and then speaking to his dash, he said, "Car, take us to Kya." "Was redirecting to Waki Api," replied the British woman. "Currently detecting 31 novel emergencies. Updating pings every 300 milliseconds. Chance of contact 0.23%. "What does that mean?" I asked. "The van has sensor equipment which can detect blinks. It's much more accurate than either of us." "And it sees 31? "Yes, that's not as many as it sounds," Trent said, and tore past a car that blinked out of existence right as we turned onto the main street. We drove on for another couple minutes, the Englishwoman updating the number of novel emergencies every 10 seconds or so. Her constant babbling eventually became a comforting background noise, and I was able to think again. "In the message you sent me, you said my mom may still be alive." I looked at Trent to see if he would react to me bringing her up, but he remained stolid. "What did you mean by that?" Trent thumped his steering wheel. "I shouldn't have sent that," he said at last. "Shouldn't have? What do you mean? You can't just say that now." Trent took one hand off the wheel and turned toward me. "Look, we're going back to your house because we need to determine your origin point. All antennas have them. It's a place of high energy where many realms intersect, kind of like a station, and it's the place where you first acquired your abilities. Based on everything you wrote, I'm guessing that place is where the forest where the accident happened when you were a young child, but I need to confirm it. Once I confirm that that's the place..." Trent hesitated. "Then what? You want us to go back there, to the place where my mom died, or at least where I think she died until you told me she might be alive but are now taking it back? That place..." "It's the only way to..." "Now detecting novel agent," the Englishwoman interrupted. We both perked up as she gave another update. "Net anomalies 437, novel agents 1, chance of contact 78%. "Crap," Trent muttered. "Car, course correct." Attempting course correct to avoid collision. Attempts made 10, 50, 75, 79. No alternate route detected. Chance of contact 96%. Time until contact. Time until contact 13 seconds. I shuddered. Looking out the front windshield, I saw cars pop out of existence left and right, opening up a clear path to the four-way intersection ahead. In a blink, the streetlights all turned green, and then they vanished completely. It was as if the entire world was being stripped down bare, and all that remained was the road, boxed in by the rows of buildings along either side. In the distance, I could see a large tanker barreling toward us. "Trent." "I know," he replied, and clicked a different button on the console, which opened a new toggle for the shifter labeled TD. He pushed the stick forward, engaging the new mode, then pressed the accelerator all the way to the ground. "You're going to want to hold on." "What are you doing?" I yelled, grabbing onto my seatbelt. "No time to explain. Car, release phase lock." Phase lock released. I watched in horror as the color drained from the road and buildings and sky, transforming it all into a dim tunnel with only the headlights of the oncoming semi-truck visible up ahead. I had the sudden thought that this was all a dream, just like the ones from my childhood. I looked over and no longer saw Trent but my mother, and then I realized this wasn't a dream, this was hell. I was being forced to relive the worst moment of my life over and over again. Just when I thought I had escaped, I was pulled right back into that car, helpless as we approached but never arrived at our impending fate. I closed my eyes right as the lights engulfed the windshield and braced for the usual pain in my chest, for the feeling of braking, but it didn't come. Shift was the last word out of Trent's mouth, and then I was infused with the sensation of being at the pinnacle of a roller coaster. I was suspended there for what felt like hours, but somehow I knew that not even a second had passed. Everything inside the van, the dashboard, windows, ceiling, doors, even Trent himself began to radiate enigmatic particles. They were a mass of constant motion, like raindrops falling through the air but never landing. I looked down at my hand, but it was gone, diffused into an unknowable number of untraceable particles. The world outside, once devoid of color, was now nothing but color. When I tried to focus on a particular spot in the infinite geometric folds of whatever realm we were traversing through, I could sometimes detect a trace of our world. The old lady from the church. She appeared as if through a window, standing behind a table, holding out a plant, only this image was so much brighter, and the plant she was holding was pure gold. Then I'd catch a glimpse of the razor blade. It was large, many hundreds of times larger than the van, and surrounded by darkness. These ghostly images appeared like holograms or reflections that caught the light at just the right angle, then dissipated. I stayed there, looping between the archetypes of my life for a long time. I knew we were returning when I felt the first sense of motion. Breath filled my lungs for the first time in what felt like a day. I blinked, and then we were back in town, driving down the same road with the blue sky above. People were jogging on the sidewalk past the little street shops. The street lights were active. I checked the side mirror and saw the tanker had just passed by. I looked over at Trent, who met my eyes. We shared a look of knowing and unknowing. For some reason that was enough, and we continued on in silence. We agreed to stay the night at my house. Trent had parked a couple blocks away in front of a couple vacant houses so as not to arouse suspicion from the neighbors. Then he lugged a large duffel bag with his equipment in and set it up in the living room. He scanned the scrapbook, which contained the newspaper clippings from the accident, several times and confirmed that was likely my origin point. I simply nodded and then went back out onto the back porch. I sat there for hours, basking in the sun. Something had changed in the past day, but I couldn't pick out what it was. Too much had happened. I had too little time to process any of it. When the sun set, I went inside and Trent told me about his plans for the next couple days. He said he needed to run a few errands in the morning, then meet up with a couple of his associates. After that, we could begin our drive to southern Illinois. He said it was likely that the entity that was chasing me had first tied itself to me during my childhood accident. For whatever reason, we came into contact, and now it didn't want to leave. Trent would help me get rid of it. He didn't go into many details regarding how that was to happen, but I don't think in my tired state I would have been able to understand much anyway. He had a plan, and that was enough for me, at least for a while. After our meeting, I made sure Trent had enough pillows and blankets like a proper host. Then I retired to my room. I laid down on my twin bed and stared up at the cream-colored ceiling. Then I turned and saw the participation awards for my junior soccer league stashed on my dresser. I pictured myself on the field, running with the ball, out ahead of everyone except the goalie. I took a shot, but it was blocked. Then I ran back to defend. How can such a simple game be so much fun? Was the last thought I had before drifting off to sleep. I woke up only once during the night. It was still dark out. The room was warm despite the small flower petal fan churning away, shifting the hot, humid air from one pocket of the room to the next. I waited in apprehension, sensing that something had disturbed me. I saw the tomato plushie peeking out at me from the slightly ajar closet door where I had stashed it so many years ago. I felt like I was missing something important. And then I heard it. There was a tapping at my window. Darkness gave way to dimness as I opened my eyes and saw slivers of gray light printed on the ceiling like lines on the page of a ruled notebook. In the distance, I heard the sound of pans clanking against the kitchen stove, and I became ever aware of the scent of cinnamon and bacon sneaking in from under my closed bedroom door. For a moment, I was back in 6th grade. My dad was downstairs cooking up his famous from-scratch buttermilk pancakes and cheesy scrambled eggs. It was probably 7 o'clock, maybe 7:05, and I had 15 minutes to get up, shower, dress, eat. Then it was off to middle school with Dad, for me to learn, him to work. It was the day we were set to be assigned our Ancient Civilizations project. fact, unless something went terribly wrong, I would be choosing ancient Rome. I didn't know much about it other than it was some great empire, but even then I didn't really understand what an empire was. I was just happy that I would get to build something with my dad. I turned on my side and looked at the closed blinds, the source of the gray lines, then the cabinet with all my trophies, and finally the wobbly fire truck red chair pushed under my desk. I was home at last. The past 15 years were nothing but a dream. There was no blinking, no malevolent demon chasing me, no inexplicable chaos. It was a sweet fantasy, but one that became bitter the longer I tried to chew on it. I swept my legs out from under the covers and sat face down on the corner of my twin mattress. My feet were adult's feet. My room was my former room, and that was Trent downstairs cooking breakfast. Unless, of course, it was my dad, in which case I'd have bigger problems than merely waking up from a good dream. After changing into a fresh shirt and pants, I went downstairs and saw that it was, in fact, Trent cooking breakfast. He was wearing a plain t-shirt through which I could see the ripples of his large back muscles as he whisked what I presumed was pancake batter. He must not have heard me because he didn't turn around when I made it to the end of the hall. I leaned against the wall, arms folded, and watched him for a minute as he finished whisking the batter, then poured it onto a hot griddle, spilling a few dribbles on the counter in the process, watched it bubble, flipped it, then transferred the golden medallion onto a plate stacked 5 high. Next to the pancakes was a plate filled with bacon, and a small aluminum pan of scrambled eggs. "Smells good," I said at last. "Find everything okay?" I thought I might startle him with my abrupt appearance. Instead, Trent looked over his shoulder, chewing on a piece of bacon. He swallowed and said, "Oh, it's you. Yeah, I hope you don't mind me using your kitchen. I thought I'd make us some breakfast." It occurred to me then that Trent likely wasn't a guest in other people's homes very often. Lucky for him, I didn't mind him using a kitchen that hadn't been mine in many years. I was going to tell him as much when I saw an open box of biscuits sitting on the counter. I pointed to it and asked, "You found that in the pantry? My dad usually makes his pancakes from scratch." He turned to look at the box, then back at me. "No, I went out and got that, and the bacon and eggs. I didn't want to dig into your supply without asking, and you were asleep, so..." I felt my eyebrows furrow as I checked the time on the stove clock. "It's 8:17 in the morning. Are you telling me you went out to the store, bought all these ingredients, then came back and cooked them? Just how early did you get up?" "Around 5, he answered as casually as if I had asked his dog's name. "I don't usually get much sleep. Around 4-5 hours is all I need. It's actually unusual for antennas to need more than that amount, but I suppose you are unusual." I opened my mouth in disbelief. Not only had he commandeered my kitchen, he was calling me unusual at 8:17 in the morning. "Sorry," Trent said, reading my expression. Well, let's just say I've not had many personal relationships. I'm used to being blunt. It's just easier that way." He took out a plate and transferred 2 pancakes, some eggs, and a few slices of bacon onto it. Then he held it up to me as a peace offering. I sighed. "This better be good," I said with a wry smile and took the plate. "Trent certified, but no guarantees. Refunds not allowed," he replied, which made me giggle. We sat across from one another at the dining room table. The meal was pretty good, but it was no dad's special. The pancakes were clearly box pancakes. The scrambled eggs lacked cheese and had a little too much pepper, and the bacon was, well, it was bacon. No complaints there. Still, it was nice to settle down and have a somewhat normal morning. After we ate, Trent unfurled the long arc of his life, which began as the second youngest brother of 8 siblings in rural Oklahoma. Trent's pops was in the logging business, first as a lumberjack, then as an owner of his own logging company. His dad acquired the business while Trent was still young, so school was never a high priority for him, at least not the way contributing to the household was. The rest of his childhood he summed up in 2 lessons. Being close has nothing to do with distance, and don't touch strange plants in the woods. I asked him if he kept in touch with any of his siblings, to which he responded saying, "The only reason they haven't had a funeral for me is because it would be too much work." When I asked him to elaborate, he said he'd not had contact with anyone in his immediate family for over a decade. He kept tabs on them. For example, he knew his mother had dementia, and his dad was forced into retirement by his oldest brother, who had gone on to take over the logging company. His sisters were all married and moved to other parts of the country. He considered reaching out several times, but his situation required a degree of security that wasn't conducive of close family ties. Not that there were particularly strong ties even before he broke contact. Trent admitted to being a bit of a black sheep. "It all circles back to one of my jobs as a home inspector," he explained. "After I moved out, I tried college and quickly realized it wasn't for me. So I entered the workforce and did a bunch of odd jobs: construction, carpentry, plumbing. I even drove a garbage truck for a while, but I ended up in home inspection. There was one job in particular which made me aware of. Trent paused and gestured toward the space between us. Our situation, the blinks. You remember what I told you about origin points being like a station where other realms intersect with our world? Well, this house was like Union Station or JFK Airport if you prefer a plane analogy. There was a pile of junk up to my knees in the basement of that house. All of it had been blinked in. I spent a couple days on the property, running tests, trying to identify the strange phenomenon, but on day 3 I rolled up to an army of what I thought at the time were feds, parading around the property like ants on an anthill and sectioning it off with crime scene tape. I saw disgust funnel into Trent's expression. They're not feds at all though, at least not anymore. I call them the organization, a group of people who lead in the formalized understanding of what you know as blinking, and they're the reason I have to take precautions. I considered this for a moment. Trent's story was certainly plausible, but I was missing a key piece of the puzzle. Okay, so what does this organization want? You make it seem like they're not good people. Have they tried attacking you? This caused Trent to laugh for a solid 10 seconds. Sorry, it's just, I mean, if you knew what I knew, you might think it's funny too. Then tell me. Trent took a deep breath, then released. It's a long story. The gist of it is this. The organization has a certain device which I call the receiver. Think of it like a giant antenna. No, not us kind of antennas. An actual antenna. It's like the machine equivalent of us, but with 1 billion times the bandwidth. Their goal is to use the receiver to map our world in relation to other dimensions, then use that map to establish dominion over everyone and everything. In order to do this, they need muscle, both human muscle and antenna muscle. They're in the process of harvesting as many of us they can find. They're like a giant diamond company who is taking to the mines. When they find a stone, they take it back to their factory for cutting and refinement. In real terms, they run tests on us and attempt to augment our powers. The ultimate goal is to create a strong antenna, or an antenna capable of causing phase shifts, blinks. Trent saw from my expression that he was starting to lose me, so he stood up and began rolling up his shirt. "What are you doing?" I asked, turning away. Then I saw what he wanted to show me. There was a long scar beginning high up on his ribs and slashing all the way down to his left hip. There was also what appeared to be a patch of burn marks on his stomach. It was early on when I got these, Trent explained. I was naive. I actually thought I'd be able to reason with these people. The only reason I escaped was because of dumb luck and a box of hand grenades, but that's a tale for another time. I learned 2 important lessons that day. First, the organization isn't screwing around, and 2, they aren't immortal. Most of them are regular, everyday humans, except for their obsession with power. Trent let his shirt fall, covering up the marks. I ran into them again recently at their headquarters. My team and I are working on a plan to... He paused, seemingly weighing his words, then changed gears. Well, I guess we can go over that another time. I couldn't help but feel that Trent was holding something back. As much as I tried to resist thinking about yesterday, the old demon man's words kept ringing in my head. You think he can help you? He's only here to help himself. Then I thought about what Trent said at the deli. That's the thing that got me really interested in you. Somehow you seem to be able to control it without gear, just by praying. Did Trent think I was a strong antenna? Is that the only reason he's helping me? Because he wants to recruit me? And if that is the case, what if I said no? Listen, Trent, I started, but I saw Trent was already nodding. Still, I pressed on. I need you to tell me what I'm actually doing here. Why did you agree to help me? And what does helping me really mean? I want to know the truth. The truth is, Trent started, then stopped and looked out the glass door that led onto the deck. I looked too and saw a sparrow had alighted on our old bird feeder. It tried pecking at some of its non-existent grains, then sang what I assumed was a song of displeasure before taking back off to the skies. The truth is, I do want to recruit you. I think you have the potential to be the strongest tool in my arsenal, but I won't require it. To date, I've helped 53 of our kind, but only 7 have stayed on. Most decide to go on and live normal lives. Trent scooted his plate to the side. In our case, this can essentially go one of 2 ways. In either instance, we pass through Chicago for 2 stops. First, I need to meet up with an associate who has something to drop off to me. Then I need to stop at a storage locker and trade out some gear that will allow me to open a phase portal. When we arrive at your origin point, I'll open the portal and you'll look inside. Based on everything you've told me, I'm guessing that childhood accident was when the demon appended itself to your life. By seeing how it entered your life, you should be able to figure out how to dispel it. At least that's the working theory. Returning to the origin point has always worked for the other antennas, although I must admit your situation is different, but I can't imagine it's so different that this method won't work at all. After you return demon-free, you're free. You can walk out and never see me again, and hopefully you'll live a happy and peaceful life. Or you can decide to throw your lot in with mine, and I can show you how deep the rabbit hole goes, so to speak. Trent looked into my eyes, and when I didn't respond for a few seconds, he said, "That's it, that's all I got." I smiled and responded with one sentence. "When do we leave?" Memories have a strange architecture. In some ways, they are the great safety net of our experiences, collecting them like a bucket under a leaky roof. In other ways, they are an eternal reminder that nothing ever truly lasts. Perhaps a better way of thinking about memories is as the ghosts of our past lingering in the present. As I took one last stroll through my childhood house, feeling that it might be my last time for a long while, I felt the imprints of childhood memories press into my awareness. I could hear my father's voice reading to me at my bedside. I could see him holding one of my stuffed animals above my head as I wrestled him for it. I could recall the times when I'd sneak down the stairs late at night and quietly open the freezer, grab the ice cream carton, then head back upstairs to eat it. I felt a yearning to return to those memories, to walk into the fictitious pictures my mind was painting on the canvas of my present. I knew I couldn't return, but I still wanted something to hold on to. I went back to my room and grabbed the cotton stuffed tomato from off my closet cabinet. Then I walked through my dad's study and removed a volume I recalled him frequently reading, a hardcover book with a green binding called A Collection of Great Works. I placed these items by my feet in the passenger seat of Trent's van, and just as we were about to leave, I remembered something else. "My plant," I blurted. "Your what?" "My plant and my car. I left them at the deli. Do you think we could swing by and get it?" Trent checked the time, then said, "Yeah, I guess we can. I just hope it isn't towed." Luckily, it wasn't. I half expected to find a ticket on the windshield, but there wasn't one of those either. I unlocked the door to my Jetta and got into what felt like an active oven. "Hot," I said, and rolled down all the windows, then cranked up the AC. I saw my plant resting in the cup holder that I'd left it in the previous day. I picked it up and touched its soil. It was dry and beginning to crack. "Hang on, little guy," I thought. Then I led the way back to my house. When I arrived, I parked at the head of the driveway. I turned off the car, then ran inside with the young tomato plant, bringing it to the upstairs bathroom sink and dousing it in water. I wasn't sure how much I was supposed to add, but I figured after the sauna experience it had yesterday, I could afford to go a little overboard. Once it was fed, I opened the small purple drapes and placed it on the windowsill which faced east, meaning it would hopefully get plenty of morning sunlight. "Good now?" Trent asked after I hopped back in the passenger seat of the van. "Yeah," I said. "Good now." "Then let's get a move on." Road tripping with Trent was a much different experience than when we were driving for our lives. For one, Trent wasn't nearly as tense. He drove with the windows down and one hand on the steering wheel like out of a Mustang commercial, talking intermittently about his adventures, people he'd met, jobs he'd done, close calls. He was like a living radio, and when his personal station wasn't on, he was playing one of his CDs, classic rock mainly. When he was in an off period, I found myself looking out the window at the rolling wheat fields and cloudy blue sky. Journey was playing, and the lyrics to one of the songs crept into my head and reverberated there. "The wheel in the sky keeps on turning. I don't know where I'll be tomorrow. I've been trying to make it home, got to make it before too long. Ooh, I can't take it very much longer." In a strange way, I felt like I was leaving home, but in another way, I was going back. And then it occurred to me that perhaps I didn't have a home at all. Did I ever have one? These past couple days had called everything about my life into question, to the point where the past seemed as mysterious as the future, and both intersected at that one place in the woods, the place where it all began, the place we were headed. We only stopped once at a gas station to refuel, get snacks, and use the bathroom. Otherwise, it was smooth sailing, other than one heated discussion with Trent that began when he addressed his vehicle as car for the 5th time. "Okay, you need to come up with a better name than that." "What do you mean?" Trent asked, seeming genuinely confused. "You have a supercar and you named it Car. That's actually embarrassing, but it is a car." I face-palmed. "First of all, it's a van. A van is a type of car. Second of all, would you name your kid in Kid?" Trent thought it over for what I thought was much too long. At last he concluded, no, I'd probably name him Boy, or if it's a girl, Girl. After 5 more minutes of his childish banter, we settled on the name Ava, my choice after rejecting his runner-up name Scar. At around the 7-hour mark, I dozed off, then woke up a couple hours later to the sensation of the van dipping, then bumping up into an elevated climb. The evening sunlight that was pressuring my eyelids to open dissipated and everything was suddenly dark. I opened my eyes and saw we had entered a parking garage. Trent pulled into an open spot on the second level. "We're here," he said, and gathered up his gun, which he stashed in a driver's side underboard compartment that I'm guessing he had installed himself. "I see that. You want to wait here or—" I opened the car door, which was answer enough for Trent. We both got out and started down Maple Avenue. I had been to several cities before, Chicago among them, but the size of the buildings always struck me with awe. As we walked alongside dozens of other pedestrians, I looked up and traced the closest tower to its peak, guessing how many stories it was in my head. Then I'd be pulled out of my game by the honking of some nearby vehicle. We continued for 2 blocks until Trent made a path directly toward the nearest Starbucks. I didn't know what I was picturing for a meeting with his associate, but it definitely wasn't a meetup at a coffee shop. Still, I followed him in. Then when I saw that Trent was leading me to a corner table where a casually dressed Chinese girl who appeared even younger than me was sitting, I blurted in a hushed tone, "Her? She's your associate?" "Took you long enough," said the Chinese girl, looking up from what appeared to be some kind of homework assignment. "And she's in school?" I asked, incredulous. The associate looked to me, then to Trent, who nodded, then back to me. "It's just a cover. I'm glad to see it still works, though." She reached out to shake my hand. "I'm Allison. It's nice to meet you." Trent gave me a smirk, then said, "Looks can be deceiving." I grunted an affirmation and shook Allison's hand. "I'm Lauren. It's nice to meet you, too." "Sick, you have it?" Trent asked, skipping right to business. "Of course," Allison replied and removed a mailing package from her backpack, setting it on the table. "You want to go make sure it works?" she asked, gesturing up at the ceiling with her eyes. Trent seemed to think it over for a second, then looked at me, but before he could say anything, Allison cut back in. "I'll stay with her. It's been a while since I've had any female company. Why don't you let us girls talk while you take care of that?" she said in a seductive yet authoritative tone which garnered her years that her appearance did not reflect. Trent hesitated, but only for a moment. "Okay, I'll be right back," he said. Then he hurried out the door in the direction we had come from. "Come, sit with me," Allison invited. "Tell me about yourself." I took a seat on the small wooden seat opposite Allison, then crossed my legs. "What do you want to know?" I asked, feeling discomfort rise in my stomach. Nothing about the situation, from the mysterious package to Trent leaving me alone with this girl, to the girl herself, whose voice was as velvety smooth as the latte she was stirring with a black coffee straw, sat right with me. "I'm curious about what you think of Trent." "Trent?" I repeated. I realized this was the first time I was putting any of my thoughts about Trent or our relationship into words. "I guess he's a pretty straightforward guy. He seems to know what he's doing." Allison flashed me a small smile, then took a sip of her latte. I saw the sticker on her drink read chai. Then she set the cup down and sighed. "Yes, he's very straightforward, definitely doesn't mince words." She looked up into my eyes. Hers were a rich black like onyx pebbles, but there was something about the way the light refracted off them which simulated a kind of inward motion, as if they were tiny whirlpools. Her smile spread across her lips. "I'm curious. What did he tell you?" Tell me about what?" "About what you're doing, about where you're off to, what's the plan?" "Don't you know?" I asked, but it immediately occurred to me that maybe she didn't know. I never saw Trent with a cell phone. Just how did he communicate with his associates? And what if he didn't want her to know what we were doing for a good reason? Should I tell her? No, Trent keeps his cards close to his chest. He always has. "Don't you work together, though?" Allison waved her left hand in the air. "Of course, but it's because of the nature of our work that most of our communication is done in person, so Trent doesn't tell me much outside of the current job. I was just curious is all." "That makes sense. I mean, I'm actually pretty curious about what you do, too." "Oh," Allison's voice went high as if she suddenly sensed an opening. "Then why don't we trade stories? You tell about your trip and I'll tell you about mine." I thought it over for a second. I really did want to hear what Allison had to say, and she was Trent's co-worker. It's not like I was spilling crucial secrets to an enemy. We're currently on our way to southern Illinois. Specifically, we're going back to my origin point so I can confront a demon that Trent thinks blinked into my life there. Allison stopped stirring, but her eyes didn't break from mine. "A demon, huh?" She raised the cup and took a long sip, then placed it back on the table and continued stirring. "I met a demon once," she started, looking up at the walls as if her life was playing on a screen there. "It was back in China where I was born." She dropped her attention back to me. "Do you mind if I reminisce a little? Maybe you can get something out of it." I shook my head, but something in my gut started to stir again. Allison continued. "I was born during the era of the once-child policy. As a result, my mother decided to leave me in a shoebox on the side of the road. I was a girl, so that that's just how it was. Like many other babies in my condition, I ended up in foster care. However, for whatever reason, I wasn't adopted. Years passed, and when I turned 6, the government decided I'd be of better use building our impoverished town's GDP in a factory that assembled electronic devices for Western countries. Mostly they had me cleaning, but when I turned 8, one of the employees asked for my help with one of the soldering machines. That turned out to be the beginning of the end for me. I sliced open the ring finger of my right hand. I remember specifically seeing the bone underneath the split flesh and thinking it looked so small and white. The employee claimed to have nothing to do with my accident, and the management declared my injury minimally invasive and bandaged it up. 2 weeks later, and who would have guessed that the wound would become infected and, well, Allison dropped the straw into her cup and raised her right hand, spreading the fingers out for me to see. There were only 4. Her ring finger was missing, and a small V-shaped scar had taken its place. I'm lucky that the surgeon was experienced enough to take out the whole digit. That way it healed in a way which makes it somewhat difficult to notice. You didn't notice after all, but then again, is that really luck? She made a fist and brought it to her lips, stifling a laugh. No, now I remember, my luck was still yet to come. She continued stirring, because you see, after that incident, they moved me to a clothing factory with a boss who had a penchant for getting drunk and roughing up his workers. And well, one night I was walking back to foster care when I heard the outside door to the manager's office slam shut, and there he went, stumbling, slurring insults, curses, and here I was, perfectly in his path. We met eyes, and in them I saw absolutely nothing. A hollow shell of a man, and I can still remember what it looked like to see that shell filled with a demon. Allison's eyes went wide with some strong emotion that I couldn't place. He grabbed me by my hair and dragged me out into the field, far away from civilization. I tried to fight at first, but every time I tried to lunge away, I was only ripping a hole in my own scalp. It felt like flames were spewing from my head, and my only respite was when the blood eventually cooled over the wound. By the time he had thrown me against the rock, I'd already all but given up. Then, when my head met the stone, I heard a pop and my grip on the world loosened. The man continued touching me, but it was as if I was disconnected now, floating somewhere above my own head, and gravity was beginning to reverse, causing me to float higher and higher, away from the horrible nightmare below. Allison paused for a moment, and I suddenly realized I was holding my breath. Then I saw the most bright light I'd ever seen. At the time I thought it was either the sun or heaven or something like that. It was just too bright for this world. But then after looking for a little longer, I noticed it was in the shape of a person. It reached out toward me, and I had never been so quick to respond. When I touched it, I felt all my pain immediately dissipate, and I felt warm and peaceful, and I was no longer in the sky. I was back in the field, but when I looked around, the man was gone, vanished, right out of existence. I didn't understand it at the time, but that was my first experience with the shifts. All I knew then was that I was free, and I wasn't gonna waste that. I ran as far as I could, away from the factories, the foster home, the corrupt governments and corporations. I kept running until I arrived at a city that didn't know me, that didn't want to know me, and I liked it that way because it's easier to live as a ghost than as a victim. Allison perked up, and when I turned around to see what for, I saw Trent entering back through the door. But you know what's interesting? Allison blurted out, her voice becoming quieter. Trent never took me back to confront my demon. Her voice became a whisper. In fact, I can't recall him ever taking any of us back. For a moment the whole world became a still frame. Allison's clear olive skin and dark eyes made darker with eyeliner. Her narrow nose, her small lips now coiling into a smile. My entire body was a hair trigger hat, only needed the slightest force to set it off. And when Trent placed his hand on my shoulder, I whirled around and narrowly missed a haymaker that swept just shy of Trent's face. "Whoa, whoa, whoa," he said, and stepped back with his palms up. "It's just me. Is everything okay?" I turned back to Allison, but she seemed different now. Her expression was benign, confused even. "Are you okay?" she asked. We were just talking about where you were off to next," Allison said without a hint of pretense. "Okay, well, chat time is over. It's time to go," Trent said and started guiding me toward the door. I turned back and saw Allison mouth some words which I swear I heard, as if they had been directly transmitted into my brain. "See you soon," she purred, and she was smiling. The next leg of the trip passed mostly in silence. It was a little over an hour to the storage facility, which was located just south of Chicago. My heart was beating wildly in my chest as I pictured Allison's smile. I wanted to ask Trent if demons could possess antennas, if somehow one one of us could become compromised. But then I remembered Allison's words and stopped myself, because I didn't know if I could really trust Trent. I tried to tell myself I could trust him, that it was Allison who was the liar. Her whole persona seemed fake at best and possessed at worst. But then, what if she was telling the truth? What if Trent was the enemy? He sensed my quietness and tried striking up a couple conversations, but I only gave one-word answers. Somehow, our trust was so brittle that a single, well-placed sentence was enough to snap it. When he asked if everything was okay, I lied and said that I just had a headache and needed more rest. So I leaned my head against the stuffed tomato and tried to sleep, even though I knew I wouldn't be able to. We arrived at the facility just as the sun was setting for the night. Trent pulled up to the self-service gate and scanned a card which caused the automatic doors to swing open. We looped down a couple rows of the outdoor units until we came to 48. "We're here," Trent prompted, but this time I didn't budge. I felt his eyes on me after he turned off the ignition. "Hey," he called, "are you awake?" I was silent. I heard Trent quietly click open his door, then close it the same way. I waited a few seconds, then turned my head and watched him from the driver's side mirror. He opened the storage locker, then walked inside and turned on a light. It occurred to me then how dimly lit this outdoor storage facility was. There was a weak overhead lantern peeking over every fourth garage like an anglerfish's lure, leaving a large portion of the road not hit by the light bubbles completely dark. I tried to plan my next move. I could leave Trent and run, but where would I go? Or I could stay and see Trent's plan through. There was a chance this was all an elaborate trap. Maybe Trent was working with the demon, or maybe he was the demon. But then why did he save me? Twice. Maybe he was actually a double agent for the organization, but he could easily have captured me by now, unless he needs me to go back to the origin point for a different reason. I considered everything I had learned up until this point. We live at the cross-section of different realms. These other realms interact with our world. Antennas, who are a very small minority of people, can see these interactions. The organization wants to harness our power and create a strong antenna to achieve some kind of universal hegemony. I'm the closest thing to a strong antenna to date. Trent knows this. He's taking me back to my origin point despite not taking the others back to theirs. Trent claims to want to fight the organization. The best way to fight the organization would be with a strong antenna. What if Trent was trying to make me into a strong antenna? I considered this chain of reasoning. It seemed very plausible, especially after Allison's cryptic messages. Was she trying to warn me of this? But that smile and the "see you soon." If she wasn't being possessed, why would she be seeing me soon? Suddenly, my thoughts gave way like a broken dam as I heard a ping come from Ava's radar. I jumped, thinking that all of the electronics turned off with the ignition. But when I looked at the circular sonar map, I saw a red dot had just emerged in the top right corner. I looked out the window in the direction of the ping, but I couldn't see anything heading down the road. Ping, 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 ping. 4 more dots appeared behind the first, and they were approaching. I jumped out the van and ran over to where Trent was hauling in a large cardboard crate into the back of the van. "Trent, there's pings on the radar, a bunch of them." He dropped the box next to 3 others, and I realized I had never seen inside the back of the van. It was filled with what looked like pneumatic tubes wired into circuits, and in the center was a tripod which was holding a large halo-shaped ring. "Pings," Trent said, then his face widened with shock as he realized what I meant. "Crap, how many?" 5, maybe more now, and they're getting closer. 5. He jumped out the back and ran into the storage locker. I thought he was going to close the door, but when I saw him hauling boxes back toward the van, I yelled at him. "What are you doing?" "I need to load this up for tomorrow. Here." He tossed me his keys. "Get it started." Seriously? Trent didn't respond, only kept shuffling boxes into the van. I turned and ran to the door and hopped in the driver's seat. As I was turning on the ignition, I saw the row of bushes that was just outside of the facility begin to rattle. The next sweep revealed a whole sea of pings. I rolled down the window and shouted Trent's name. "One more, that's all. Get in the passenger seat, I'll be there in a sec." I scooted over the center console and waited, clutching at the bottom of my pants legs. Just as Trent slammed the rear door of the van shut, I saw the first figure emerge onto the road ahead of us. It looked like some kind of large coyote, though it was hard to tell because it was still 50 meters out. "Now detecting 53 controlled agents," Ava said right as Trent jumped in and shut the driver's side door. "Net anomalies 53. "Ava, increase radius to 5 miles, Trent instructed as he backed up all the way to the end of the lane and spun us around toward the gate. Just as we left, I saw the pack of coyotes stalking toward us, slow at first, then in a dead sprint. Increasing radius, Ava responded. Increased, recalculating, complete. Now detecting 451 controlled agents. Net anomalies 451 inches. What does controlled agent mean? I asked. Hold on, Trent said and accelerated into the gate, bursting through it. The whole van shook and I heard my phone fall in the crack between the seat and door. Trent steadied the van then said, "It means the things chasing us are being controlled by something that isn't detectable." The demon. That'd be my guess. But why can't Ava detect it? Trent switched to the right lane, then merged onto the Interstate South ramp. Probably because it isn't trying to kill us. Then what? I looked back at the map and basically had my question answered. All 451 pings were coalesced in a semicircle on one side of the map. The side of the map that we had just come from. Is it trying to force us toward the crash site? It seems that way, Trent answered. Trent, pull over. Huh? Pull over, I yelled. He looked at me eyes wide, then he did as I had instructed and pulled off in the middle of the ramp. The red dots slowly closed in on our position. Now detecting. Shut up, Ava, I said. I could feel my blood boiling. I'm not going one step further until you tell me the truth. Why are we going to my origin point? What is your real motive? What do you mean? I already told you. I unlocked the passenger side door. Wait, Trent said and reached out toward me. Just wait. There was silence, except for the pings indicating that the beast behind us had re-encroached on our position to about 50 meters. Okay, I didn't tell you everything, but we don't have time now. I opened the door. Okay, I didn't tell you everything, it's true. I've never done this with anyone else, but the reason is because I never needed to. And if I told you what might happen, you would have refused it. Refused what? This, me, my help. Lauren, I am trying to help you, but you have to understand, it's likely that neither of us are going to live past tomorrow. You're basically confronting a dark entity in a place where I can't protect you, and if you somehow do manage to kill it, you'll be coming back to the fight of your life, because I don't have the power to hide you from the organization. They're going to show up and try to take you. I really don't know how you've lasted as long as you have. Whatever protection you had growing up, it's gone now. And now I'm all you have, and in some twist of fate, you're all I have. Ava reactivated, now detecting 1,117 controlled agents. Proximity till contact, 20 meters, net anomalies, 1,117 inches. I closed my door, but what if I still don't want to go through with it? Trent pointed at the screen. Then we die right here, right now together, because I am 100% certain that if we don't go to that crash site, we're dead anyway. All of us. Another ping rolled through. I checked the side view mirror and saw the swarming pack of dogs reach the van and bound around the rear wheels. I suddenly recalled the conversation I had with Father Martin and the conclusions I had drawn. Father, I've been wrestling with something and I think God wants me to confront it. I think I've been running away and hiding from it for so long that I'd convinced myself it disappeared. Go, I said just as I felt the collision of the coyotes slamming their bodies against the side doors. Trent didn't waste any time stepping on the gas. I watched as the coyotes diminished in the distance and the pings receded into the back of the map, never disappearing fully, but covering the flank of our retreat, a reminder lingering on the edge of our awareness that there was no turning back now, that one way or another this was ending tomorrow, and I'd either be dead or something else entirely. Last year I worked at a laundromat near my parents before I moved away to college. I saw the advert in the window when I was shopping with my dad, and figured it was an easy way to earn some money. The woman who ran the laundromat interviewed me and I started that same day, but not before she introduced me to her daughter, who also worked there. She was called Mia, was really petite and really odd. The first time I met her, she immediately said, "Hey, can you do this?" Then she did this weird thing with her eyes that made them vibrate. It's hard to explain, like they were rapidly moving side to side, and the whole time she had this toothy smile on her face like it was the most amazing thing in the world. Mia must have only been a year or two younger than me, so still in her teens, but her behavior seemed really juvenile and kind of try hard. Anyway, I just figured she was trying to break the ice in her own way, so just kind of rolled with it. I got through the rest of the day with just small talk and didn't think too much of it. I was barely a week into the job when I first caught her hiding inside one of the machines. She somehow managed to climb up and curl herself up in one of the big tumble dryers. I wouldn't have even noticed had I not walked past and heard her giggling inside the drum, scaring the crap out of me. "What are you doing?" I asked, annoyed she was dicking around whilst I was working my butt off. Her large eyes watched me in the darkness, her legs pressed up against her flat chest. I'm just cleaning it. Right, okay. I'd literally cleaned the lint out of the machine just this morning, so didn't buy her lies for 1 minute. Anyway, she climbed out of the machine like a creepy gymnast shortly after, earning a few strange glances from some of the customers, but no one was hurt. The next time was worse. About 3 days later, I was helping this young mom set up a load of laundry after her machine broke in her apartment. It was her first time in a laundromat, so she didn't really know where to start and had brought her kid along too, although she wasn't doing a very good job of keeping an eye on him. I just finished walking her through the different powders, prices, and settings when I heard that same eerie, echoing giggle again towards the back of the store, only this time it was followed by a child's laughter. As soon as I heard the sound, I had a weird hitching feeling in my gut. Although I'd only known Mia for about a week, I knew leaving a random kid with her would be like leaving them unattended by an open electrical socket. Anything could happen. Sorry, I'll be right back, I said to the mom, leaving her to load her washing into the machine. Most of the machines in the laundromat were 10-kilogram washing machines. We also had a few larger 18-kilogram machines, and one massive front-loaded 33-kilogram machine used for washing duvets, etc., which Mia's mom had affectionately christened the Beast. The whole time I'd worked there, I'd never seen it used once, yet I found Mia half inside the Beast that day. Playing with the kid stood in front of it. Her bottom half was inside the drum, elbows resting on the rubber seal with the door open as she handed quarters to the boy. She was pulling funny faces and doing that weird thing with her eyes again, making him laugh. The sight made me freeze for a second, wondering what the hell she was playing at. I heard the boy ask her, "What do I do?" Just close the door," she explained, and pressed the big red button. It was only then I realized she was trying to bribe the kid into locking her inside the machine and switching it on. "Mia," I hissed, hurrying through the maze of machines to confront her. "But what will it do?" the little boy asked her. "I'll go on an exciting ride." I finally reached the door and grabbed it, putting an end to the madness. Both Mia and the kid looked annoyed, like I'd interrupted a great game of theirs. "What did you think you were doing?" I snapped. "It was just a little fun, right, kiddo?" The boy laughed as Mia tousled his hair before he finally scampered off back to his mother, who was still piling dirty underwear into the machine at the other end of the store, oblivious. "Hey, just chill," Mia said, sensing my anger as she slid out of the machine. He wasn't really going to do it. I shook my head and walked away, knowing the kind of stuff my own little brother would do for a few dollars. Later that day, Mia's mom came out of her office to check on us, and I thought about ratting Mia out right there and then, but the way she seemed to always dote on her strange daughter like the sun shone out of herself made me pause. Why would she believe me over her own flesh and blood? After all, I hadn't even made my first paycheck yet, and I really needed the money. That thought alone ultimately made me decide to just let it slide. I didn't know how much I'd come to regret not bailing right there and then. A few days later, Mia and I were both working the evening shift. It was nearing closing time and the place was dead. I was just putting a damp sock in the lost and found basket when she appeared at my shoulder and asked, "Do you like me?" I frowned and focused on the sock. Yeah, of course. I knew I'd over-egged the lie as soon as it left my mouth, but I wanted to keep the job at least until college started. "Then why do you never look me in the eye?" I forced myself to turn away from the basket and finally face her. "What do you mean? Do you like me?" Her face had a sudden seriousness to it. Whenever I'd seen her before, she'd always had the ghost of a smile on her lips and a playful look in her eye, but now she looked almost disappointed in me somehow. My mouth felt dry as I croaked out a yes. Liar. I felt my awkwardness switch to fear as she did that weird vibrating thing with her eyes again, only this time they seemed to pull mine in. It was like I had tunnel vision all of a sudden. I tried to take a step back, but my legs felt cut off from my brain. Instead, they followed her as she slowly walked backwards towards the row of machines lining the rear wall. Panic set in as I realized she was leading us straight towards the Beast. The playful look on her face returned as she sensed my fear. "Don't worry," she said, her voice sounding like it was at the end of a tunnel. "It's just a little fun." Her vibrating eyes never left mine as we reached the huge machine. She opened the door at her back and started to climb in. In my periphery, I saw her arms and legs contort in a nightmarish way. The whole time her head stayed fixed in space, her eyes now the center of my universe. Once she'd crawled inside, her voice called to me from the darkness of the drum. Close the door and switch it on. Wash cycle, max spin. I felt powerless to obey. I watched as my arms closed the door and programmed the cycle. The panic inside of me rose, making me feel like I'd vomit if I still had control over my body. As my finger hovered over the start switch, I held onto one last sliver of hope. The cycle wouldn't start without money, and I was fresh out of quarters. Yet as she ordered me to start the machine and the button clunked home and the door locked without any complaints, I realized she'd already preloaded the coins. The sick creep had planned this right from the start. I heard the machine fill with water and felt tears spring into my eyes as I realized I was about to watch someone drown to death in the worst possible way. The drum part filled to her chin, but Mia never took her eyes off of me, not even as the machine started to spin. I didn't know if it was the trance-like state she'd put me in, or if her neck wasn't human, but her head filled that thick glass door and never rotated an inch. I remember watching a nature documentary on birds of prey and how owls' heads remain stable in flight to better track their prey, and Mia's face reminded me of exactly that, just this pale, big, black-eyed face staring back at me through the glass. She must have forced me to stand like that, watching her drown for a good half hour, because I remember the floor starting to shake as the machine hit its spin cycle. The drum whirled about her horrid face like an optical illusion, pulling me in and never letting me go until finally, the sudden surge of power caused the lights overhead to flicker. My eyes lost sight of hers for a moment in the darkness, and I blinked for the first time in what felt like an eternity. The top halves of my eyeballs felt like dry gritted glass as they finally slid down on the tears collecting below. Suddenly, in control of my own body again, I flung a hand over my eyes and looked away. I heard Mia calling to me from the machine, trying to get me to look at her again, but I wasn't falling for it. My brain felt foggy and my legs felt drunk. For a split second, I thought about trying to switch the beast off before realizing it wouldn't work mid-cycle, and it'd only release the true monster currently trapped inside of it. Whatever Mia was, clearly wasn't human, and I dreaded to think what she'd had planned for me next. I remember half running, half stumbling past her mom's office door, praying it wouldn't open in case she tranced me too. Thankfully, I managed to stifle my sobs and it stayed shut, leaving me to slip out the laundromat door into the night. I never went back again. When my parents asked why I quit, I told them I needed more time to focus on my studies instead, which seemed to shut them up. A couple of days ago, I finally mustered up the courage to look up the laundromat on Google Maps Street View. I didn't know if I was hoping to see if the store had closed, or if anyone had left any bad reviews complaining about the creepy teenage girl that worked there, but I found neither. Instead, all I saw was what looked like another ad for hire in the window and the silhouette of a small woman with bleached blonde hair staring out the window. I didn't know if that was Mia or just a bored customer, but I closed that browser window real quick. I'd hoped telling my story on here would somehow help me to process it, but now I've told it I don't really feel any better. I still can't use the dorm laundromat because every time I close the machine door, I see her creepy owl-like face staring back at me. I'm either hand washing or buying new clothes these days, which is breaking my bank account. I think I need help. Maybe I should see someone. Hey man, I don't know how to tell you this, but there's people in the basement. Chris's words were in between silence and a whisper. I sat up in the bed, my eyes adjusting to the frantic figure in front of me. What? I asked him. What are you talking about? Be quiet, dude, he whispered. There's people in the basement, like 6 of them, I swear to God. He paused, taking a few deep breaths. We should get out of here. I rubbed my eyes, trying to get the fatigue to settle so I could comprehend the magnitude of what he was saying. For context, my friends and I had booked an Airbnb near the mountains for the weekend, hike and then drink, get our minds off of work and school. I had been super tired after hiking, so I'd taken a nap. I shook my head. You went down into the basement? I asked. We weren't supposed to. They told us not to. Yeah, dude, I know, Chris continued, but I did it anyway and I saw people down there and we need to leave ASAP. What kind of people? I asked, pretty much fully awake now. You mean the owners of this place? They came back? Chris shook his head. Number not them. Weird looking people, creepy people. I sat up thinking that maybe Chris had taken some of the LSD we'd been saving for the next day. Dude, relax, I told him. Explain exactly what you saw. He laid it out pretty concisely. Despite the fact that the people who had posted the listing had explicitly told us not to go down there, Chris had gotten drunk, gotten curious, and went down there. To his surprise, the door had been unlocked. He couldn't find the light switch, but there was just enough of it coming through the windows for him to be able to make his way down the stairs. Arriving at the bottom, he allowed his eyes a few seconds to adjust, and right in front of him he could see a small table with about 6 people sitting around it, their outlines illustrated by the afternoon light. At first, his brain rationalized it as large dolls or puppets that had been placed there, but he continued looking at them, and eventually one of them turned their heads to face him. He didn't stick around after that and shot up the stairs, shutting the door behind him. As he told me this, I kind of didn't want to believe him, but there was also absolutely no reason why he'd be lying. He just wasn't that type of guy. Coupled with the genuine terror on his face, I began leaning towards the idea that he was telling the truth, and that were actually a bunch of people sitting silent at a table in the darkness of the basement. I got up and looked out the bedroom window, seeing Jay and Paul standing on the front porch, grilling burgers. Then I looked back at Chris. If you're telling the truth, we need to call the people who own the place. I tried, he said. They didn't pick up. I've sent them texts as well. I shook my head. So what? You think they're dangerous? Should we call the cops? Chris shrugged. I don't know, he said. I don't know if they're dangerous, but they didn't look right and I want to get out of here. For a while, we stared at each other, the general silence of the house becoming progressively more ominous. After a while, I sighed. Yeah, let's get out of here. We grabbed our phones, wallets, the car keys, and moved down the stairs, out of the house as fast as we could. Jay and Paul were laughing, holding beers as we approached them. Paul turned around, pointing a greasy spatula towards us. You guys hungry or what? He asked. Chris began telling them what he'd seen, but it was obvious that they were more than a few drinks deep and not taking anything he was saying seriously. Dude, it sounds like you're tripping, Jay said. Are you sure you're not tripping? I'm being serious, Chris said. I swear to God I'm serious. We need to get out of here now. Well, I'm about 5 beers in, so I ain't driving, Jay said. And I sure ain't letting any of you drive my truck either. Are you sure you just weren't seeing stuff? Fine, I'm walking then, Chris said. I'm not staying here. Look, I'll go down there and talk to them, Paul said, half joking. See what the hell they want. Jay laughed as sheer disbelief washed over Chris's face. I'm not lying, man, he said. I'm not. Yeah, I believe you, Paul said dismissively. I'll go and see what's up. Chris continued to protest, but Paul wouldn't budge and soon he was inside the house, making his way towards the basement. Chris shook his head, his eyes wide, nearly bulging out of his head at this point. Screw this, he yelled, seeming to grow more agitated by the second. I warned you. Before we could say anything else, he bolted, sprinting like a bat out of hell towards the woods. We tried chasing after him but couldn't come close to matching his pace. We stopped, panting for air as he watched him disappear into the trees. What the? Jay asked. Is he being serious? I thought it was a joke. I shook my head. Let's go check on Paul. We ran back to the house, entering to see the basement door wide open. The place was completely silent, but before I could call out, I could hear somebody moving up the stairs. I backed up, unsure of what to expect, how to react, when Paul came out of the darkness, looking somewhat bewildered. He looked at us, shook his head. This is freaky, man, he said. Was he being for real? Jay asked. There's people down there? Not exactly. The 3 of us went down there with my nerves yet to be completely settled. We couldn't find a light switch, but there were enough windows and enough daylight for us to move around. Turns out Chris hadn't been totally correct, but he probably hadn't been lying either. Planted right in front of the stairs was a table with 3 chairs. Sitting in those 3 chairs were some of the most lifelike sculptures I'd ever seen. 2 soldiers in what appeared to be old military outfits and a woman in some kind of long religious dress. They weren't quite enough to be uncanny. If you looked at them for more than a few seconds, you could tell that they were carved from stone and then meticulously painted, something you could confirm by touching them. Still, they were exceptionally crafted, something that could have only been achieved by a dedicated professional. I mean, I don't blame him, Paul said, referring to Chris. I almost shat bricks when I first saw them. I mean, what? I remembered back to the conversation I'd had with him, how he claimed that one of them had actually looked at him and then a shiver ran down my spine. Jay laughed, a palpable relief in his voice. How much you think we could sell these for? I'm down to take them and find out, Paul joked. On the surface, it made enough sense. The homeowners were in possession of some very valuable items that they stored in the basement, simply forgetting to lock it this time around. Jay and Paul continued looking at them, taking pictures, marveling at how weird it all was. On the other hand, I wasn't so keen on doing so. I wanted to get the hell out of the basement ASAP. The details just weren't adding up. I knew Chris well. If the only thing he'd seen had been these statues, he would not have reacted the way he did. said. Jay was looking at his phone, smiling at the pictures he'd taken, when suddenly his expression dropped. He put his phone down and looked ahead. "There's another one over there," he said, "in the corner." "What do you mean?" Paul asked, looking closely at one of the soldiers' rifles. "Another statue in the corner." Paul looked up and looked towards where Jay was pointing. "Oh," he said, "yeah, I see it." The two of them continued to look at it but showed no indication of wanting to explore it. Instead, they stood still, their expressions slowly being taken over by a look of deep unease. Eventually, I looked as well. It did appear to be a statue, something tucked away in one of the very dark corners. It was tall, extremely so, maybe 7 feet, its head well eclipsing the top of one of the bookshelves. Its bottom half was completely obscured, but from what the light was revealing, it was wearing some kind of helmet, like one of those steel ones soldiers were equipped with back in World War I. There came a point as my eyes were adjusting to the darkness where a pit began to form in my stomach. Its features were slowly revealing themselves and it almost looked as if it were twitching. I thought that maybe it was just the darkness playing tricks until I saw it blink. Clear as day it blinked. I guess the other two saw the same thing because we were practically trampling each other running up the stairs. We slammed the door shut behind us before quickly pushing one of the couches in front of it. Paul and I were halfway out the front door, but Jay was still inside the house. "What the hell are you doing?" Paul yelled at him. "Come on." "I need my laptop," Jay said before throwing Paul his keys. "I'll be quick, start the truck." He ran up the stairs while Paul continued to curse at him. "Really, dude, are you serious?" And then I remembered my own laptop, thinking about how annoying it would be if I were to lose it. I looked at the basement door, then at the stairs, then at Paul. "It's gonna take 5 seconds," I said. I could hear him cursing behind me as I ran, jumping 3 steps at a time until I reached my room, darting in and grabbing my laptop from the desk. As I rushed out of there, I saw that the door to Jay's room was shut. I stopped, slowed my breathing. I was almost certain that he hadn't gone back downstairs. I would have seen or heard him. I approached the door. "Jay," I asked, "the hell are you doing?" No response. I looked at the door, but every muscle was frozen, almost as if my body were warning me not to go in. Suddenly, it creaked open just slightly, and I jumped back. "Jay," I asked. Still no response. I couldn't see anything through the crack until my eyes drifted upwards near the ceiling. A pair of eyes looking down at me, large eyes set too far apart on a face with skin that was too pale. I turned and bolted back downstairs as I heard the door swing open the rest of the way. Of course, I didn't look back and ran outside and jumped into the passenger seat of the truck. "Where is he?" Paul asked. "Just drive," I told him. He didn't protest and stepped on the gas, ripping down the dirt road. We continued driving until we reached a rest stop, the first place with other people. By that point, we had both called and messaged the homeowners about a dozen times each. Nothing but radio silence on the other end. We even noticed that the listing itself had been removed from Airbnb entirely. And then we called the police. Somebody answered and I explained the situation as in-depth as I could. The operator listened without interrupting, waited a few seconds, and then asked me for the address. I told it to her. Another bout of silence elapsed before she hung up. After arriving back in the city, we considered reporting it again, but neither of us felt the nerve to do so. We also haven't heard from Chris. We've gone to his apartment and knocked on his door, but nobody answers. I tried to do some research on the place, Googling the cabin's address. One result came up, a website that appeared to consist solely of an album of black and white images of soldiers standing in various places with dates and addresses written beneath them in small text. I Control F'd and found the address I was looking for. The accompanying photo was of a tall soldier holding a blood-stained hatchet and standing in a clearing surrounded by trees, with the outline of a cabin behind him. The man's skin was pale, his eyes oddly large and set so wide apart that it just didn't look right. There were also 2 dates attached to it, August 17, 1915, and the date that we had first arrived at the cabin. It's been about a week removed from the incident, and Paul and I have both made a mutual decision to drop it, to try and go back to our ordinary lives. But it's been difficult. I keep expecting to receive a phone call from the cops, asking me questions about Chris and Jay, where I'd last seen them. Those guys have family. They probably knew where they were headed and who they'd gone with, and yet nobody's reaching out. It doesn't feel like we're out of the clear here. It doesn't feel like this is over at all. On December 21st, 2017, sheriff deputies responded to a wellness check in the general area of Tehachapi, California. The call came from the mother of a minor child who stated that the child's uncle had lured them out there to attack without provocation. The man attacked and gave chase, going so far as to pursue their car on foot as she drove away. Officers located the man and quickly noted that his behavior was vacillated wildly. Initially, he launched himself at the officers, only to pull back, fall to his knees, and beg for help. He introduced himself as Catalin and asked for help again, only to cut off and begin screaming the following phrase: "Screw you, Robert, screw you, Robert, screw you." Catalin was booked into the central receiving facility. Catalin's appearance was of great concern. Most disturbingly, both his chest and abdomen kept bulging and receding, rolling like waves. Whenever one of these waves crested, Catalin choked and his eyes turned a strange but unmistakable yellow hue. Shortly after booking, Catalin asked for a chaplain. This request was denied. Shortly after denial, Catalin flew into what was assumed to be a substance-induced frenzy, wherein he tore the metal grating off his cell and proceeded to vomit copious amounts of dark, foul-smelling fluid. The volume of vomit was so significant it covered all of the cell floor and much of the hallway beyond. Officers noted that Catalin's eyes were glowing yellow. A chaplain was called. Catalin said he didn't know how to pray but needed someone to pray for him. The chaplain asked why, to which Catalin responded that he was possessed. The chaplain asked somewhat doubtfully if Catalin was hoping for an exorcism. This question incited a hysterical outburst from Catalin, who repeatedly screamed, "No exorcism, no exorcism. It has to stay inside." Due to prior experience with another agency inmate, a representative from the sheriff's office facilitated contact between Catalin and an agency representative. After a brief interview, the agency brought Catalin into custody where he remains. At this time, Catalin is the only confirmed case of demonic possession incarcerated at AHHNASCU. Catalin is a 34-year-old male approximately 5 feet 6 inches tall. One eye is brown and one is yellow. He suffers extensive chronic bruising on his chest, stomach, and back. He has a full-body matrix-like rash that has been described as web-like. Catalin is pleasant and cooperative, although he suffers from major depressive disorder and severe anxiety relating to the possibility that the entity inside him will escape. He has also expressed severe anxiety over the question of who or what will keep the entity contained once he dies. Given that Catalin is a essentially biological maximum security prison and that containment of his prisoner aligns with agency directives, he has been granted T-Class designation. Interview subject: the jar of clay. Classification: string. Cooperative / destructible / Gaian / constant / moderate / unknown asterisk. Periodic re-evaluation required. Interviewer: Rachela B. Interview date: December 3rd, 2024. Lying isn't always a sin, but I still don't forgive Robert for the lies he told. Robert lost his life. That's what his mother says. Robert lost his life. That's a lie. Robert didn't lose his life. He stole it from himself, but I get it. Sometimes a good lie is the only tether to your sanity, the lasso keeping your demons at bay. Maybe if Robert had told himself more lies, he'd still be alive, but maybe not, because Robert already lied a lot. Lies like, "I'm okay, you don't have to worry about me, everything's fine." Really, if I could, I'd say, screw you, Robert. Screw you for lying. Screw you for hiding. Screw you for letting me love you so much for so long. Screw you for loving me so much for so long. He used to say I was the only person who made him comfortable. Paradoxically, comfort made Robert uncomfortable. Whenever he felt too comfortable for too long, he ruined it. He ruined it for the last time by launching into a gloriously unhinged rant that ended with him telling me, "You're the only thing that feels like home and I love you so much, but I hate you even more and that will never stop." I don't think he was lying when he said that, why I left. His mom found him 9 days later, broke into his apartment, saw him slumped against his bathroom wall, and immediately took 7 pictures of his body that she texted to me along with the message, "Are you happy now, you freak?" The pictures were bad because he'd been dead for a while, but the decomposition wasn't the worst. The worst was the smallness of him. How flat, how hollow hollow, how empty he looked. Not like there was nothing left, but like there had never been anything at all. His mom barred me from his funeral. I didn't hold it against her. She needed someone to blame, and strictly speaking, I am to blame for a lot of Robert's misery. But at the same time, holy crap, we never dated. We never even tried. We were too enmeshed, too damaged, and we knew each other too well. When you truly know someone and that someone truly knows you, it's not romantic, it's not beautiful, it's just terrifying. And even if that's not true, so what? The last thing Robert ever said to me was, "You're the only thing that's ever felt like home, and I love you so much, but I hate you even more, and that will never stop." And the last thing I ever said to him was, "Screw you, Robert." 6 days later, he was dead. 3 days after that, his mother found his body and sent me pictures. I stared at those photos for a long time. Then I watched The Land Before Time. That was Robert's favorite kid movie. That's why he named our cat Littlefoot. I thought watching it in memory of him would make me feel close to him, but it just made me sob until I thought I was going to throw up my own guts. A few days after that, his mom sent me the last text I ever got from her. "There's a bunch of your stuff at his apartment, so come get it before I burn it." I could think of nothing worse than entering Robert's death-suffused apartment, but curiosity is the leading cause of death for cats, and I am no exception. See, Robert and I never lived together. We were never even romantic. Enmeshed, yes. Devoted, of course. Codependent, you bet. But in love? Not really. God, I hope not. Anyway, Robert was almost dangerously protective of his private spaces, and his cheap apartment was no exception. I'd only ever been inside it twice, so I wanted to know how anything that was mine could have possibly ended up there. That's the only reason I went, curiosity. The scent of death was waiting for me when I opened the door, but it wasn't as strong as I'd feared. I drifted through his apartment like a ghost, traversing the liminal space it now occupied between Robert's home and an empty place. I wondered if his ghost was walking with me. The thought was infuriating. I crept through the living room, kitchen, hallway, even the bathroom with its body-shaped stain. I took more time than I should have. I didn't see anything that was mine. Until his bedroom, utilitarian and bare, colorless and impersonal. It made me ache. The only pop of color was a lilac moto jacket draped over a cardboard box. I recognized the jacket because I'd given it to him years ago, on the day I told him I was transitioning. That was also the day he screwed up beyond repair with Cassie and their daughter. I picked the jacket up. For half a second I was convinced he was inside it, growing back into existence in my arms, mostly because I could smell him, warm, with a faint undertone of bitter growth, like a dying garden in the dog days of summer. As his scent enveloped me, the room around me faded into a whirlwind of images, enfolding me into yet another liminal space, this time the one between memory and reality. That brings me to the real reason I didn't want to go to Robert's apartment. There's this thing I do. If I touch an object, and if that object is or was important to someone, then the memories attached to that object start projecting themselves in my head like a simulation. It sounds crazy. It is crazy. When I picked up Robert's jacket, I fell into one of the memories attached to it. Gray skies, bitter air swirling with snowflakes. I was sitting on the sidewalk with Robert. He was heartbroken and humiliated. He'd so badly wanted a family and had managed to make one, but he'd screwed it up just like he screwed up everything else. Cassie had the patience of a saint combined with a naivety singular to very young women intent on healing their damaged boyfriends, but Robert was too much even for her. She'd been right to leave him and he knew it, so there was nothing to say. Seeing him curled over himself and sobbing so hard his entire body shook was one of the worst moments of my life, and that's saying a lot. I shrugged out of my jacket and threw it over his shoulders, then drew him in for a hug as some stranger gawked at us. It was awkward. All my hugs are awkward. But Robert leaned in anyway and kept crying, tears hitting the jacket alongside snowflakes. Then the memory changed. Snowflakes faded to darkness, cold deep into warmth. Robert was sleeping, curled underneath that stupid coat. 1,000 images of 1,000 nights superimposed over each other, each almost but not quite identical. He slept with it, used it like a teddy bear. The scene evaporated when I threw the coat back onto his bed. Tears streamed down my face as a fresh wave of rage crashed inside my chest. I looked at the box again. It had my name written on it, Catalin. On top was a note, "Please don't remember the bad things." "Oh, screw you," I whispered. I recognized everything inside. The ragged stuffed Pikachu with a sunken face, the dusty blue ribbon from a spelling bee 20 years past, a hand-knitted orange scarf, a green collar with a silver tag that said Littlefoot on one side died, and if found, contact Katarina or Robert with my childhood phone number listed underneath. The thought of him holding on to all these things for so long was too much. Beyond too much. Crushing. It was crippling. If I were strong, I'd have left that box and everything in it on the bed for his mother to burn. But I'm not strong, so I shrugged into the jacket. Snowflakes swirled again as his scent, so like a dead garden, crept over me and took the box to my car. Then I drove out to the carnival. Neither Robert or I ever left the town where we were born. It sucks, but living and dying in the same place does have perks like knowing all the awesome secret hangout spots. One of our spots was an abandoned carnival out in the canyon. 70 years ago, a carnival stopped in town the night before the most devastating earthquake in the county's history. All the performers died. A few of the animals survived, but they had neither ability nor inclination to pack away the game booths and rides. The big top is long gone, the prizes pilfered or rotted into the sand, but the structures remain, and the great rusted loop of the sketchiest looking roller coaster ever made still rises over the desert. Robert and I weren't in love, at least I don't think so. I hope not. We were enmeshed though, beyond enmeshed. The carnival isn't where it started, but it's relevant because it is the place where I first saw Robert's demon. Yes, his demon. A demon followed him around, a literal demon. I already told you I see memories when I touch things. I also see memories when I touch people. I always saw Robert's too, but after my mom died, I started seeing something else when I touched Robert, his demon. We were 10 and we'd snuck off to the carnival after school. I hugged him, I don't remember why anymore. When I pulled away, I saw the demon between us. It looked almost like his dad, just wrong. Like something pretending to be him, just way scarier. Before I knew it, the demon, the crooked, uncanny valley imitation of his father, slithered forward, pushing us apart. Then it wrenched Robert's mouth open. Before I could even react, Robert screamed and shoved me away. I know how it sounds. Even after we talked about it, after Robert calmed down, after told me how he'd seen that thing crawling after him every day for as long as he could remember, I didn't think much of it. I actually kind of thought we were both losing it, and I wasn't even worried it. That kind of hallucination made perfect sense to me, given that Robert's father killed my mother. See, when my dad walked out, Robert's father stepped up. He started dating my mom. I know having a parent move on is usually hard for kids, but I didn't care because I got to see Robert every day, until his dad killed my mom and then himself. Afterward, I visited Robert at his foster home whenever I could. All he did was sleep when I came over. He was afraid to sleep alone. Well, no, technically he was afraid to lay down. He was afraid he'd die if he laid down too long. This is because he watched his dad die flat on his back, drowning in his own blood from his self-inflicted gunshot wound. So whenever I came over, we sat back to back, leaning against each other. Then we looped our arms together. For weeks, that was the only way he could sleep, leaning against me because he knew I wouldn't let him fall. Anyway, that doesn't matter. What matters is this. The day I saw Robert's demon for the first time, Robert said, "It's my dad, and he keeps telling me to kill you, but I never would, Kat, never." I knew Robert would never hurt me. He was so relieved when I told him that. The day I picked up the box from Robert's apartment, I sat under the roller coaster remembering all of this. I fell asleep, half hoping the rusted, sand-scoured metal would collapse and crush me. It didn't. I went on with my life, only not really. In the weeks following Robert's death, I had to hold stuffed animals to help me sleep. I collect used stuffed animals because there are almost always happy memories attached to them, and because they're not my memories, they comfort me without any baggage. But grief is weird, and one night I needed the baggage. I grabbed that sunken little Pikachu from Robert's box. The memory washed over me. A frozen winter's night so cold it takes your breath away. We were at a buffet with both sets of parents. Robert and I were misbehaving. Robert had beaten up the buffet mascot, which made me laugh so hard I gagged. Once seated, we got into a food fight. When my mom yelled at us, I yelled back, which made Robert laugh so hard that Dr. Pepper came out his nose and sprayed everything on the table. My father promised to let us play the claw machine if we'd shut up and behave. We loved claw machines, so of course we agreed. He gave us each $10 to play. Robert didn't win, but I got a small stuffed Pikachu. I gave it to him because he loved Pokemon. Reliving that memory was like holding Robert on one of his good days. The good days were the only days Robert and I ever held each other, and we didn't have many good days. I told you I see memories when I touch things and people. That's why I didn't shake your hand when you came in, and why I hate being touched. You think you're going in for a regular handshake when a wave of unspeakable trauma washes over you, and you have to smile like you didn't just mainline hell. I know that's why Robert barely let me touch him, and to be fair, I didn't ever let him touch me because Robert is the only person who saw into me the way I saw into him. I didn't like being seen any more than he did. That's why we fought at the end, because he saw into me at the exact wrong time. It was my birthday. Robert surprised me my mom's brownie recipe, and you know, it was my birthday. I was thinking about her anyway, and the brownies just drove it all home. I started wishing for what might have been, for the life I'd have if she was still in it. It made me cry. I don't usually cry. I wasn't even crying hard, but I was crying enough for Robert to notice. He came in for a hug before I could put my shields up. I will never forget his face. The shock, the guilt, the sadness, and the rage. I'll never forget his voice either, when he said, "No matter what I do or how long it's been, that's always going to be the first thing you think when you look at me. That's why you won't, why we'll never..." That's not why, Robert. I don't really know how we got from "that's not why" to "you're the only thing that ever felt like home and I love you, but I hate you even more." But we did. That's another reason I know lying isn't always a sin, because if Robert hadn't seen the truth in me that day, I think he would still be alive. The night after I held the Pikachu, I watched The Land Before Time again. It made me remember Littlefoot, our cat. That made me go back to Robert's box and pull out Littlefoot's collar. It's my favorite memory of all time, which is why I can barely stand to remember it. We were 6 years old, playing in the yard on a golden, impossibly hot day. We heard a pitiful, tiny meow and followed it to the alley behind my house. It was suffocatingly hot even in the shade where we saw the meower, a little gray cat. Robert named him immediately, and we went to bug my mom for a collar. She took us to buy a collar and even a name tag. It was a little green heart. Robert tenderly clasped it around Kitten's neck as it clambered into his lap, purring. I looked up. There, in the memory I knew so well, was something I had never seen before. Robert's demon, grinning at us across the yard. But instead of looking like a wrong version of Robert's dad, it looked like a wrong version of Robert. I dropped the collar back into the box, gasping like I'd just been plunged into ice water. I don't know what I thought. I'd only ever seen the demon when I touched Robert. Not in other memories, not in real life. Just when I touched Robert. So I decided that it was my mind playing tricks, turning Robert into a monster for leaving me. I didn't think about it again for a week. When I picked up the ragged little Pikachu for another devastation binge, I luxuriated in the claw machine memory again until I saw the way my dad looked at Robert. Distaste, pure distaste. Robert had adored my dad, but dad hated Robert and didn't even try to hide it. If lying isn't always a sin, then telling the truth sometimes is. My dad's open disdain for a child made him one hell of a sinner. As if to emphasize that, I saw the demon standing over his shoulder leering at me. Half its face looked like the wrong Robert monster, but half its face just looked like Robert, and that half was screaming. I dropped the Pikachu and put on the jacket. The snowy day memory descended, including the gawping figure on my periphery. But when I focused on that figure, it was Demon Robert. Feeling very frightened, I picked up the blue ribbon. 4th grade, exactly 3 weeks after his dad killed my mom. Robert's first day back at school. I'd been back for a week already, subsuming my grief in the school spelling bee, which I just won. I smiled as I marched off stage because it was the only way to keep from screaming. But the smile was breaking apart. Tears were welling up even as that awful grin spread so wide it felt like it was splitting my head in half. I found Robert in the crowd, locking on him like a drowning person on a life raft. He looked hollow and ancient, but when he saw me, he smiled back. When I sat by him, he started to cry. He was still smiling though, just like me. "What's wrong?" I asked. "I thought you wouldn't want to be my friend anymore." "Why?" "My dad said so. After he died, he told me it's all my fault." I hugged him with particular fierceness, then pinned my ribbon onto his shirt. "You're my best friend, Robert. That will never stop." "No lie." "No lie." As the words left my mouth, I saw the demon over his shoulder. Half monster, half screaming Robert. I dropped the ribbon and picked up the scarf. I'd knitted it for him when we were 11. He wore it until junior high. I found myself transported to his foster home 20 years ago. We were on his narrow bed, sitting back to back with our arms looped and the scarf draped across both our shoulders. "Cat." His voice reverberated through his back and into mine. "I'm so scared. I see my dad every night. He keeps telling me to kill you." I looked over and saw Demon Robert in the closet. One half of his face was grinning, the other was screaming. Gasping, I tossed the scarf away and picked up the last thing in the box. A picture of his daughter Sadie. I recognized that picture. It had held pride of place on every bathroom mirror Robert had since the breakup. Why was it in my box? Surely he meant for Cassie to have it, or even his mom. Why me? I looked at that photo photo for what felt like a long time. Then I picked it up. The memory I saw was of Robert's suicide. He'd been holding it when he killed himself, when he lost his life. As I stood over his bleeding body, screaming, something crawled out of him. A thing that looked like him, but like a broken version of him. A version of him with half a face that was his, and half a face that was a demon. Before I could move, that thing took my hands. The touch calmed me down because I knew that touch. Whatever else this thing was, it was at least partly Robert. That was enough to make me hug it. "Help Sadie," he whispered. His voice was wrong but familiar, just like the rest of him. "I can't keep it away from her, but you can. You're a jar of clay. You hold everything in and never let anything out." Unbidden, an image rose to mind of Sadie. Sadie with a face that was half hers and half grinning monster. It made me want to scream. How do I help her? By remembering the treasure, he said, and putting the bad things in and not letting them out. Then he was gone, and so was the memory. I was back in my room, clutching his daughter's baby picture and sobbing. He used to call me that, a jar of clay, some religious reference. His dad was pretty religious before, well, you know, I asked him to explain it once. He said a jar of clay is an everlasting receptacle, both for treasure and for things that need to be locked away. "That's you," he said. "It's a good thing, I promise." "No lie?" I asked. "No lie." I still didn't really get it, but that didn't stop him from calling me a jar of clay. Anyway, it'd take too long to tell you everything that happened after I saw Robert's suicide memory. It would hurt too much besides, and this has already been so long and painful. I'm sorry. If I tell you more than the bare minimum, I won't be able to talk. This is all I can say. You know how I said Robert and I knew each other better than we knew ourselves? That's how I knew what he, or at least his ghost, or whatever it was, wanted me to do. He wanted me to share all the good memories with his daughter while making sure his demon didn't come for her. I tracked down everything of his that I could find. It was hard. His mother had already taken so much, and there was no chance that she'd let me into her house. Instead, I started where I could. My dad's house, where Robert and I spent so much time and left so much stuff over the course of our childhood. It was hard being there. It was hard when my dad wouldn't meet my eyes, and even harder when I accidentally caught him looking. I ignored him and got it to work. I wasn't sure what I was looking for, but I knew it when I found it. It was Robert's stuffed dog, an ancient stiff dog, kind of an heirloom. One his dad had before him, and his grandpa before that, and his great-grandfather before that. It was the only thing he'd been able to grab when CPS took him after the murder. The other kids at his foster home were jerks about it, so he hid it at my house and clearly forgot. When I picked up that dog, two things happened. First, I saw a memory from when we were 16. I was angry and giving him the silent treatment. That freaked him out. The silent treatment always freaked Robert out unless he was the one giving it. He was trying to make me tell him what was wrong. You know what sucks? It wasn't that I didn't want to tell him, it was that I couldn't. That's one of the problems I always had with him. One of the things I always did to him. He called me a jar of clay again. "You're one heavy jar of clay. I wish I had half your stoicism, cat, really, no lie." That memory melted away and others melted in. I don't know how to explain these memories. I told you that touching someone is a surefire way to mainline trauma. When I touched that toy dog, I mainlined pure horror. Robert and his father and his father and even his father, all carried and crushed by an overwhelming wave of horror, by a demon. His entire family, generation after generation, being stalked by this broken, grinning monster. Something that hunted them, that sank its claws in deepest, until it pulled those claws down and shredded them to ribbons. One of those ribbons was Robert's father killing my mom. An older ribbon was his great-grandfather beating one of his own sons to death in a drunken rage. And one of those ribbons was Robert shooting himself in the head while holding his daughter's baby picture against his heart. But the memories showed me something even worse. This thing, this demon, this destroyer, wasn't just sinking its claws into Robert when he died. It was worming its way inside him. It was trying to take him over, to actually be Robert, because once it was Robert, it could, and promised to, do everything it wanted. And all it wanted was to destroy. It wanted to destroy his mom and Cassie. It wanted to destroy me. Most of all, it wanted to destroy Sadie. And it wanted to use Robert's hands. Robert fought, of course. Robert fought it his entire life, even before he knew what he was fighting. That was the reason he killed himself, because he was scared he was losing the fight, and he thought dying was the only way to protect who he loved. He took his own life to try and take out the monster. Only he hadn't killed it. He'd only killed himself. I was crying so hard I didn't even notice my dad until he touched my shoulder. I jumped, thinking of demons crawling inside and commandeering my hands like a puppet master faster. My dad was looking at me, the first time he looked into my eyes in half a lifetime. Hey Qatar, Catalan, I wanted to tell you something. I patted the floor even though it was the last thing I wanted to do. He sat down like it was the last thing he wanted to do. When he saw the stiff dog in my hands, his mouth quivered. I wanted to tell you that a good man lives his life for other people. You've done that. This was the first time, the very first time, that he'd acknowledged me as a man. Robert did too, but I didn't. His voice got thick. I wasn't a good man. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, baby. He was right. If any of this was anyone's fault, it was his for leaving. I wanted to push him away. I wanted to spit in his face, to tell him he wasn't a good man, had never been a good man, would never be a good man, that he'd as good as killed my mother. Instead, I grabbed his hands. I understood instantly that I didn't have to tell him any of those things, because he already knew. You are, Dad. To my horror, I started to sob. So did he. You're a good man, you always were. You're the best father anyone's ever had. It was a lie, every last word. But lying isn't always a sin. After that, I went to Cassie's house. I lied about grabbing Robert's things for his mother, but she wasn't fooled. The only person Robert's mom hates more than Cassie is me. That's probably why she let me in. But Cassie's always been good that why. It's why I've never been able to hate her, even when I desperately wanted to. Once again, I didn't really know what I was looking for until I saw it. A Build-A-Bear I'd bought Sadie for her 6th birthday. I looked around to make sure Cassie wasn't watching, then picked it up. Robert's memory, he and Sadie sitting on the floor. If I ever scare you, or if there's something you don't ever want to tell me or your mom, you tell Uncle Cat, okay? He'll do anything to help you. He'll always keep you safe. I know, Daddy. Demon Robert crept up beside me. Together we watched his memory. He didn't look like a demon anymore, not even half of one. He just looked like Robert. I can't be you, Cat. I wish I could. I wish we could have been. But it ate me and it'll eat her. I thought I could save her, but I was wrong. You thought you could save me, but you were wrong. You can save her for me. Screw you, Robert, I said. Screw you. I threw the bear down and picked up something else. Anything else. Anything to not see the promise he made the daughter who wasn't mine, or the broken version of his dead self begging me to right his wrongs. What I touched was a baby toy. A gentle memory. Robert playing with Sadie in a pool of sunlight on a threadbare carpet. All sweet, all good, all bright, except for the demon lurking in the corner. I knew then what I had to do. What I wanted to do. Because Dad's right. A good man lives his life for other people. I don't know if I'm a good man. But Robert didn't know if he was a good man either, and he still lived his life for other people the very best he could. At that moment, Sadie walked in, hollow-eyed and lifeless as Robert had been at spelling bee day all those years ago. I wiped my eyes and almost tried to smile, then thought better of it. Hi, Cat. She sat down across from me. She looked so much like Robert it took my breath away. She was 10, exactly the age he'd been when our parents died. Sadie, I said gently, you Dad loved you more than anything. Her face crumpled. She shook her head, then started to get up. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the baby photo. Look. She looked at me, those eyes that were just like her father's filling with tears. Behind her, shimmering like a mirage, was an awful, familiar silhouette. The demon, a grinning monstrosity with no sign of Robert in its face. Her father's demon, her birthright coming into being to shred her like it had shredded her father. I had no time. I had to share the treasures, spill out all the treasure for other people to remember, so there'd be room to trap what could not be allowed to roam free. You see this picture? It's you on your 1st birthday. He kept it everywhere he went. Even though he wasn't here, he kept you with him. She gave me a look I'd seen on her father's face 10,000 times. That's why I knew exactly what to do, which was stuff the photo into her hands. She climbed clumsily to her feet and bolted, but at least she took the photo with her. Is it true? I looked up startled. Cassie was in the doorway. You don't have to lie for him. You shouldn't. I'm not lying. I wanted so badly to cry but couldn't. The only reason he stayed away is he thought you were better off without him. That's all. The way her face twisted broke my heart all over again. Why? I don't know. You're the only one he ever talked to. That's not true. He wrote his suicide note for you. Her voice was longing and loathing in equal measure. It was one sentence, just a single line telling me to remind you and Sadie how much he loves you. No lie. Only it was a lie. But when Cassie finally relaxed, I knew that it hadn't been a sin. We talked for a long time. When we were done, she gave me a hug. That's Cassie. No wonder Robert loved her. Then I went home and tried to make a plan. I knew what I had to do, but I wasn't sure how to do it. So I sat there for a while thinking, I didn't know what the monstrosity was. A demon, probably. Isn't that what it always is? A demon demon from the depths of hell, come to torment the innocent. How do you defeat a demon? Having not stepped foot in a church since my mother died, I wasn't sure, but I'd absorbed enough religion and pop culture to know that Bibles and crosses were the first main line of defense. So I dug out my mom's Bible and crucifix and held them, expecting something, power maybe, hope at least. But I felt nothing. It wasn't that they felt wrong, they just felt empty, inert, no strength, no energy, no hope, powerless, inanimate, dead, no, not dead, things that had never been alive in the first place. So I thought harder. What is a demon? Hatred, as far as I could tell anyway. What's the opposite of hate? And that gave me an idea. I went to Robert's box and picked up the Pikachu. Instead of memory descending, warmth flowed through my hands, living, moving, joyful, and powerful. So I stuffed the Pikachu in my back pocket. I pinned the spelling bee ribbon over my heart. I shrugged into the lilac jacket, heavy and reassuring on my shoulders. Most importantly of all, hanging from a chain where a normal person might wear a saint's medal, was Littlefoot's name tag. It felt warm and powerful in the hollow of my throat. These things felt right, they felt strong, and they felt true. Not exactly the stuff of which the armor of God is made, but they were reminders of the truest, fiercest love I've ever received and ever given. And that was armor enough. I drove out to the place it all began, our carnival, right under the rusting roller coaster. It was waiting for me. I wasn't afraid. I marched across the sand. Scraps of warm, loving memory drifted around me as the demon shimmered into being, a stark, eternal darkness against the star-swept sky, and I felt it. It was evil, but it was power. True, incomprehensible power. Overwhelming, ravenous strength crashing over me and under me and around me like a cataclysmic earthquake, tearing my force field of memory, my shield of love, to shreds and the shreds into nothing. I wasn't mainlining trauma, I was mainlining hate. I knew then why Robert had been doomed to fail. This was a curse, this was a monster. This was darkness, this was the monster under the bed. This was selfishness, this was destruction, this was something other. This was the Borg, this was Morgoth. This was hatred incarnate, this was the total absence of love. This was an obscenity older than time, an abomination that wanted to sink its teeth into the throat that sings the song of creation and tear it out. Love was nothing against it. I was nothing against it. It was going to win, and its prize was worse than death, to take me over and use my hands to destroy. And it was all Robert's fault, as his demon's true form bore down on me, swelling and billowing across the sky, blotting the stars and laying bare the folly of my plan. Terror overwhelmed me, and despair, and hatred. But I didn't want to die that way. Not in the dark, hating the person I loved more than anything in the world. Without thinking, I cupped Littlefoot's name tag in both my hands. Warmth swallowed me, and light, and it was summer afternoon, and Robert was tenderly clasping the collar across our kitten's neck. "You're not a stray anymore," he says. "You belong to us now, Littlefoot, and we love you." The abomination slammed into me with the force of a tsunami right as Robert looped his arms through and pressed his back to mine. And then we really were 10 years old again. A lifetime rewound. A lifetime to relive and do everything right so he and I and everyone would finally be okay. My mom would live and we would save his dad. We had time. All I had to do was wait until the darkness passed through me and moved on. Only it wasn't passing through me. It was hitting something hard, something solid and piling up, clinging to me, filling me, suffocating me, drowning me, and it was because of Robert. Because Robert was holding on and blocking it, keeping it inside me, keeping it from going away. Then it was done. Robert let go. When my knees gave way, he caught me and helped me to the ground. Only it wasn't Robert. It couldn't be Robert. Robert was dead. Only when I turned to look, his eyes were staring into mine. Number not his eyes. Sadie's. What? I couldn't breathe. What was wrong with my chest? "Honey, what are you doing here?" Sadie's voice was shaking. It's my dad. He told me you were here and memories crashed over me. Robert's voice, broken and ragged and terrified. "My dad told me to kill you. My dad told me to help you." For a wonderful second, I was light and whole and happy and above all triumphant. Robert had broken the curse in more than one way. If he just held on a little longer, I could have told him. I could tell him that we all needed him, that none of us were better off without him, that we all loved him more than he could ever. Darkness drowned me then, and hate. Hate that I could never have imagined. Hate that devours, hate that corrodes, hate that eats its way out to destroy. I don't know what Sadie saw in my face. I don't want to know. I just know know that it made her run away, that it made Cassie send a text that said, "If you ever come near my daughter again, I might actually kill you." I haven't seen either of them since. I don't think I ever will. Robert's demon hasn't escaped. The hatred is still here, right here. I'd say I'm mainlining hatred incarnate, only you can't mainline yourself. This is what I get to be now until I die. A jar of clay, a prison for a demon that isn't even mine. It's all Robert's fault and I hate him for it. I hate him more than he could have feared, more than he could ever imagine. That's what I'd say to him right now. Screw you, Robert. You were the only thing that felt like home and you burned yourself down anyway. I hate you. I will always hate you. I hate you more than you could ever know. I hate you so much, but I love you even more, and that will never stop. No lie.
If you enjoyed these stories, please consider subscribing and liking this video. Let me know your thoughts of these stories in the comments below. I frequently talk to my viewers there. But anyways, I hope you were creeped out.
Just kidding. Stay safe.